Hello and welcome to the channel. This is the third episode where early graduation, a unique bloodline, and an insane teacher set the stage for Naruto's shinobi career. Determined to live life on his own terms, Naruto's knack for taijutsu forces him to ask whether he can truly be a shinobi of Konoha or will he be pushed away forever. Please like and subscribe for more epic adventures. Now, let us begin. Guy stood next to his student before the Hokage, trying not to give away his excitement to his observant apprentice. Naruto would be delighted and Guy knew he was ready. His genin had truly blossomed since his graduation and his youth was shining bright. "We're just waiting on the other team," the Hokage said calmly, shuffling scrolls on his desk. So maybe Naruto would not be delighted, but the prospect of leaving the village should outweigh his feelings about this genin team. It was agreed between himself, the Hokage and the other Jounin sensei that this would be good for all their students. Konoha was not a place where animosity could exist between fellow shinobi. This mission may help to break down the barriers between Naruto and his former classmates. His student had to be prepared to work with anyone and the same applied for the other genin. That was what made the will of fire so strong. "Sorry for keeping you waiting, Hokage-sama." A voice spoke up from the door behind them and Guy turned to smile brightly at Hayama. He watched the other Jounin shuffled his three genin into a line next to them and he could physically feel Naruto tense up at his side. He resisted the urge to clap his genin on his shoulder in comfort. He also could not help but note that the three genin looked as unhappy at this as his own. "Now we are all here, we can get started," the Hokage announced, handing a scroll over to Hayama. "This is your first C rank for both teams, so in the interest of safety, we are combining your teams for this mission. I understand there has been some tension between your teams in the past, but that is irrelevant now. You are shinobi of Konoha and I expect you to uphold that standard. Do you understand?" There was a chorus of "Yes, Hokage-sama" from Team 5, but Naruto just nodded. "You are to deliver that letter to the Daimo's palace," the Sandaime continued. "It is a standard delivery mission. Hand it to a member of the administrative team at the palace and return with their reply. There is no truly sensitive information enclosed, however. If you are ambushed and feel that you cannot defend it, destroy the letter. I do not expect you to run into this problem on a C rank." Guy nodded at the underlying message. "Your sensei will report on your conduct and efficiency during this mission," the Hokage added with a stern glint in his dark eyes. "How this mission goes will weigh heavily in future assignments." There was a weighted silence before the man sat back in his chair. "You are free to go." Guy bowed and left the office, Naruto trailing close behind. The minute the door shut, Naruto turned to him, arms crossed and expression sour. "Is he serious?" Before Guy could reply, one of the other genin spoke up. "If you can't control yourself, then maybe you should stay in the village," the taller male genin said snidely. "Like you're ready, Kichi team," Naruto smirked with a cruel twist Guy had never seen from his student. "Last I recall you pissed yourself when you thought you were under attack." The other genin turned a shade of purple, but before they could continue, Hayama stepped in. "Kichiro, that's enough. This is exactly what cannot happen when we leave the village," he said sternly. "Run, Midori, I also expect better of you. You are shinobi of Konoha and need to act like it whoever you're working with." Guy grinned brightly. "I could not have said it better myself, Hayama-kun," he proclaimed cheerfully, patting Naruto heavily on the back. "This is a wonderful opportunity for the genin to allow the springtime of their youth to blossom for all the world to see. The bonds between comrades will strengthen and the will of fire will burn brighter than ever." "If you say so, Guy," Hayama grinned weakly back at him. "Should we meet at the front gate in an hour?" Guy threw double thumbs up in response and Team 5 left, leaving Guy with his apprentice. "You finally get to leave the village, Naruto-kun. You can see the world." Guy pointed out brightly, and the tension in Naruto's shoulder that had been present since they saw Team 5 finally started to dissipate. "Yeah, I guess I do." It was not quite a smile, but Guy knew by now how to read his apprentice. "So gate in 30? We have an hour, Naruto-kun. I am not taking the chance that they'll leave without us and say we were late, Naruto scoffed, starting to walk down the hall. I'll work with them, Guy-sensei, but Gigi didn't say I had to trust them. Guy followed after his student. Naruto's youth really was blossoming wonderfully. 6 months ago he would not have even considered working with Team 5. He was making progress and Guy could barely keep himself from telling the whole village how proud he was. His student was ready for this. Naruto bounced along the road, the looming walls of the capital inching closer with every step. It had been an uneventful journey so far and his former classmates were just as happy to avoid him as he was them. Naruto opted to take up a position at the back of their formation and he hadn't allowed them out of his sight. They were probably scheming something and while he had faith in his ability to deal with whatever feeble attempt they may make, he was outnumbered. He didn't like being outnumbered. He'd handled his own meals and had refused the offer from their Jounin sensei to join them for dinner. Guy had tried to encourage him but Naruto had managed to get away by offering to take the first watch. He hadn't exactly slept when the other genin had been on watch but he had never needed much sleep. One of the perks of the damn fox, he supposed. The most important thing was that he was out of the village. He breathed in deeply. Somehow the air felt different here. Better, fresher. He didn't have to keep watch for disgruntled civilians. The people they had seen on their journey here had looked at them but not at him. No one cared who he was out here. He had imagining what the world was like outside of Konoha almost his whole life and he had to say that it was better than he imagined, mainly because he hadn't really had a reference to imagine from but still. This was great. Not even Team 5 could ruin this for him. The walls of the capital loomed ever closer and Naruto let his eyes trail over the high stone walls. He could see what must be the palace peeking over the top of it in the distance somewhere. The trees on either side of the road that led to the city gates had started to thin out but were still thick enough that Naruto sometimes felt like they should have been named the Land of Trees rather than the Land of Fire. Traffic had picked up and civilians bustled around them, some alone, some with a group and a lot with various animals. They finally reached the gates and Naruto hung back as Guy and Hayama spoke to the guards. He threw a filthy look at Kichi team as the other genin muttered, "I'll be surprised if they let the demon in." They were all ushered in soon enough and Naruto coughed as a wall of unfamiliar smells slammed into his sensitive nose. Some were familiar, he'd encountered them at the markets back in Konoha, but there were many that weren't. There were a lot more people and stands and color and noise and Naruto just stood there, taking it all in. This was amazing. He knew there was more out there but to be confronted with it, to realize just how much there could be, he never wanted to go back. If this place was this cool, then what would he see if he actually left the country? Not only that, but no one knew who he was. Not a single person in the street in front of them turned to look in their direction. As they started to walk further into the city, the people that did catch his eye didn't give him a second glance. Was this what it was like to be normal? Did other kids his age get to feel like this all the time? "I miss Konoha already," Ren muttered beneath his breath. "There are way too many people here." "Yeah, it feels like it would be so easy to get lost here," Midori added quietly. Naruto threw them an incredulous look. That was the best part. He turned to Guy and smiled wide, genuine in a way that he hadn't felt in years. "Thank for this mission, Guy-sensei," he beamed. His blue eyes were immediately drawn back to the bustling crowd so he missed Guy's look of surprise. "No problem, Naruto-kun." His teacher clapped him on the shoulder. "It is wonderful to see your youth shine so brightly in a new place." Naruto was so busy taking in his surroundings he didn't acknowledge his sensei's words. He also ignored Team 5's unimpressed looks in his direction. They'd walked a far bit into the city, heading in the direction of the massive palace in the distance when Naruto's sensitive ears picked up a commotion. He wandered off in that direction until he found the source. He frowned as he spotted 3 teenagers hassling an elderly vendor. The crowd around them was happy to just walk by and ignore the situation. At least this was familiar. There had been many a time that the villagers of Konoha would look away from his own mistreatment, oftentimes at the hands of people that looked exactly like these boys. The sight boiled his blood and popped his happy bubble. People were still shit no matter where he was then. He couldn't stop himself from moving forward to stop one of the boy's fists from smashing more of the vendor's stuff. "What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The boy snarled, dark eyes glaring down at Naruto. "It isn't your place to intervene. Do you know who I am?" Naruto hated that phrase. His place. Everyone seemed to be of the opinion that his fucking place was below theirs, and apparently there was nothing he could do about it. He personally thought they could shove that idea up their entitled asses. A shithead, he answered the boy's question and shoved him back, forcing the older teen to stumble. He crossed his arms as he glared at the trio. "Fuck off and leave the old man alone. Haven't you got anything better to do?" He was pretty sure they were civilians, so he wasn't allowed to do any real damage to them, but fortunately they were easy to scare. This is one of those times wearing his Hitai-8 would have been handy. "Naruto-kun." Guy came around the corner and Naruto smirked at the trio of dickheads as they spotted the Hitai-8 around his teacher's waist. He watched the leader debate within himself, before taking the coward's route. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I am going to tell my father all about the abuse I suffered at the hands of Konoha shinobi." He shoved his two accomplices back and they soon disappeared into the crowd. Guy walked over to join him with a big bushy eyebrow raised. Naruto feigned ignorance and turned back to the vendor, picking up his wares from where they had been scattered. "Thank you, young shinobi," the man smiled at him. "They like to cause trouble around this neighborhood. Their fathers are nobility, so there is little we can do about it. You have a kind heart." Naruto smiled weakly, unsure whether he should tell the man the real reason he came to help. It was more that he wanted to spite the bullies rather than help the victim. He would not be making a habit of helping strangers, he had too many problems of his own. "My wonderful apprentice has a heart of gold." Guy grinned brightly, holding out a thumbs up. "He is a wonderful example of youth and he is blooming majestically for the whole world to see." Naruto resisted the urge to facepalm. He translated that statement to know that Guy was happy with his actions by why couldn't the Jounin ever just say things without using the word youth? "I am Arata Taichi," the vendor introduced himself, bowing his head. "I am Mado Guy, Konoha's sublime green beast of prey." His teacher posed proudly. "This is my young apprentice, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto rolled his eyes and shoved the last of the stuff onto the table before hooking his teacher's elbow. "Come on, Guy-sensei, the daimyo is expecting us and Team 5 is totally going to ditch us. Later, Arata-san." He threw a half-hearted wave behind him, missing the man's reaction to the name Uzumaki. Naruto tried not to fidget as they waited for the daimyo to arrive. Guy kept looking at him with proud tears in his eyes and he wasn't sure how much longer he could take it. He had half a mind to go out and kick a puppy or something to make his teacher stop looking at him like that. "Welcome, Konoha," a man said as he entered from a side door, moving to take a seat on the daimyo's seat. "I believe you have something for me." Hayama stepped forward to hand over the letter, head bowed. Naruto observed the leader of their country. He wasn't much. He was old like Gigi with small, hooded eyes and a thin mouth. The rest of his head was covered with a black cloth, with a white fan resting on top of his head pointing towards the ceiling. Naruto wondered how they stopped that from falling off. What if he bent over to pick something up? Did the daimyo even pick things up from the floor? His trail of thought had apparently caused him to miss the daimyo actually reading the letter. The man folded it up carefully. "Tell the Hokage, I agree." Naruto blinked. Was that it? What was even the question? He hadn't expected anything too important since it was only a C-rank mission, but they came all the way here for just a yes. Naruto shrugged off those thoughts easily enough. Any reason to leave Konoha was a good reason in his book. He followed Hayama's and Guy's example and bowed low to the man, making their way back to door behind them. Apparently it was rude to turn your back on the daimyo. Naruto thought it was a dumb rule, but adults had loads of dumb rules. What was one more? The massive doors closed and they were lead to the entrance of the palace. We'll head back tomorrow morning, but you have the afternoon to explore the city a bit, Hayama said. I trust you to stay safe and make good decisions. I don't want any incidents. For some reason he looked directly at Naruto when he said that. The capital should be relatively safe for you, but keep an eye out anyway. I expect you back at these gates at sundown, okay? Team 5 chorused their understanding while Naruto looked Guy. His Jounin sensei gave him a thumbs up. You have earned this, Naruto-kun. He grinned. Enjoy the full potential of your youth and live with no regrets. Naruto rolled his eyes but couldn't help the fond smile as he turned away from his sensei to head into the city. Team 5 walked along with them and Naruto resisted the urge to fuck off. He could stand their presence until they were out of Guy's sight. He could do this for Guy. Hey, why is your Jounin sensei so fucking trashy? They had just turned out of sight of their teachers and Kichi Team opens his big fucking mouth. What the fuck are you talking about? Naruto narrows his eyes. I mean, I knew your Jounin sensei had to be garbage, sneered the older boy. Why else would they give him you after all? But seriously. Is he sick in the head or something? Guy sensei is one of the best Jounin in the whole village, Naruto hissed venomously. Yeah, but that spandex? The haircut? The whole spiels about youth? There is something wrong with him, Ren added gleefully. He's perfect for you. No other student could stand him long enough to learn anything. Naruto stopped, feeling his nails dig into his palms. He could take them talking shit about him, well, maybe not take it, as he had proven before with his pranks, but he knew how to deal with it. It was expected. He had not expected them to go after Guy sensei. Guy didn't deserve for people to talk shit about him. He liked Naruto. He was proud of Naruto. He didn't try to change him or get at him for being a little brat, he just accepted him. No one had ever done that before. You really think that putting people down is going to get you anywhere? He said quietly, drawing the attention of the genin. He continued before Kichi Team could interrupt him. You really think you're going to be anything? He glared at them, the words spilling past his lips like poison. Yeah, I am the demon brat, but guess what? I fucking matter. He took a step forward. I am going to be remembered. I am going to be someone. Not because things were handed to me, but because I grabbed them with my own two hands. I am going to build my future into one that I can be proud of. What the fuck are you going to be? None of you are going to make it past Chunin. The best you can hope for is to become one of the hundreds of faceless Chunins, and either die for the village or fade into obscurity. His volume rose. You don't even work hard. You will never be Jounin because that would mean stepping outside your fucking comfort zone. You are going to go through the rest of your life being only good enough. You are never going to matter. You are going to live your little lives and pass from this world with nothing more than a whimper. He hadn't noticed when he'd stepped into their faces. He didn't notice how pale they had become. All he could feel was the indignation, the rage. So yeah, you can make fun of me. You can make fun of Guy sensei. You can feel really fucking good about yourselves because that is only for right now. You know, deep fucking down, that I am going to leave you and the rest of our godforsaken class in the fucking dirt. You know that we were never the fucking same. I was born to be great and you were born to be my fucking backstory. He turned on his heel, unable to look at their faces for a second longer. He stomped his way through the city street, the crowd parting for him. He didn't even know where he was going, just away from them. Why did it have to be so hard just to be himself? Why couldn't people just leave him alone? All he wanted was to just live without people feeling like they had to shit on him to make themselves feel good. Why was that so hard? You're the Uzumaki. He stopped short as he looked up from the road to see the vendor from earlier that day. Arata-san? The man's green eyes sparkled as he ushered Naruto to follow him. Naruto was too surprised to anything but follow. I have been waiting around the daimyo's residence for you, the man said, his cane clacking against the stone below them. I couldn't allow you to leave the capital without speaking to you first. Arata-san, you don't have to. I didn't really help you, Naruto tried to tell him, but the old man wasn't having it. Hush now, child, and just follow me. You are an Uzumaki, correct? Which parent? My mom? Naruto answered hesitantly. Excellent, excellent, Arata said as they finally came back to his stall. I have something that belongs to you. Naruto had no idea what this man was talking about. He didn't lose anything in the capital for it to be returned to him. His green backpack had been firmly closed the entire time he's been in the city. Many years ago, shortly after the fall of Uzushio, I met a man named Uzumaki Ashina. He said he was named for a past Uzukage. He was wounded and I took him in, helped him heal and hid him from the like of Kyumo and Iwa. His eyes grew soft. I fell very much in love with him and he with me. We couldn't continue the clan line and he died almost 10 years ago now. He left me these and I promised that I would pass them on to the next Uzumaki I met. He was not optimistic, believing his clan to be gone. He finally hauled a duffel bag from the cart behind his stall and dumped it on the table, gesturing for Naruto to come look. Naruto walked forward slowly, spotting a couple of swords and some scrolls. Arata picked up one and offered it to him. They were masters of Fuinjutsu, you know. Place a drop of your blood onto that seal there. Naruto just looked at the man incredulously before playing along. There was no fucking way. He bit his finger and watched the blood fall onto the seal. There was a burst of light before the thing unfurled, revealing different Kenjutsu katas. You really are an Uzumaki, Arata whispered with tears in his eyes. Take it all. It is yours. Arata-san, I can't. You will. These are heirlooms of the Uzumaki clan. They need to be with a member of that clan, he smiled sadly. I believe our meeting today was fate. Maybe it was my Ashina allowing me to fulfill my promise or the gods themselves, but you were meant to have these, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto struggled for words. He'd never had an heirloom before. He wasn't allowed any of his parents' stuff since it was a big secret and all. He belonged to a clan, a real clan, one he'd resigned himself to having lost before he was even born. Thank you, Arata-san, he bowed in a rare moment of complete sincerity. I will treasure these for the rest of my life. Sasuke stomped into the training ground, his target sitting innocently in the middle reading scrolls. Wearing that obnoxious orange, it was a wonder Sasuke had taken so long to find him. You. Naruto looked up and he rolled his eyes. Rolled his eyes at Sasuke. As if he was the problem. Where the fuck have you been? What do you mean, where have I been? Naruto lowered his scroll. Why were you even looking? You are going to be my training partner, Sasuke stated, pointing right into the dobe's stupid face. Oh man, this again? Naruto fell back into the grass. Sasuke scowled and walked so was standing directly above him. You have to train with me, he restated, holding eye contact with the genin. Teach me how to walk up walls. Why me? Naruto raised a blonde eyebrow up at him. I am literally the last choice for pretty much every person in this village. Everyone else is dumb, Sasuke said firmly, and this caused Naruto to sit up. The blonde stared at him for a long moment before patting the grass beside him. Sasuke sat down gracefully, crossing his arms. You graduated 3 years early. You are the only person my age who could probably keep up with me. I'm the only person your age who could beat you is what you mean, Naruto grinned. Sasuke just glared at him. Naruto sighed heavily. Fine, but I have conditions. You can get into place I can't, he began. You can also get the good prices, so you're going to buy my groceries and weapons. I'll give you the money. I'm not going to be your fucking errand boy. Naruto held up a hand. I would do it myself, but it costs like double and they're starting to catch on to my henge. That didn't make any sense to Sasuke, but the blonde continued before he could ask. Also, I want to make it clear that we are not friends, got it? So if a guy with silver hair or one in green spandex asks, we don't know each other, got it? They absolutely cannot find out about this. They would never let me live it down. Sasuke scoffed. He didn't need friends, and it wasn't like he was going to be admitting to training with Naruto with anyone. If anything, Naruto should be the one bragging. This is a business arrangement at most. You don't have seniority on me, so demanding isn't going to do shit. Just ask like a normal human being, cause if you come in ordering me, odds are I'm going to do the opposite. I can walk away at any time, so demanding ain't going to do shit. Got it? Sasuke rolled his eyes but nodded. He would take it. Getting stronger was the only thing that mattered, and if he had to put up with this blonde idiot to do it, he would. He blinked at the outstretched hand, taking it after a moment. Looks like we have a deal, partner. Naruto grinned and Sasuke rolled his eyes even harder. This better be worth it. Naruto breathed in the biting night air, watching the lanterns rise above the village into the night sky. The end of another year. It was a pretty good year, he would say. He graduated from the academy, met Gai-sensei, left the village for the first time. Even Kakashi and Sasuke weren't so bad. He pulled the black duffel closer. He had spent many nights just looking at his family's swords, trying to imagine his relatives swinging them around. He wanted to learn, he had the katas, but something made him hesitate. He wanted to do it right, he wanted to honor his family. He didn't want to screw this up. He already had so little from his ancestors. Kenjutsu would work so well with his bloodline limit. He had mentioned the swords to Guy when they'd met back up in the capital. The man had said that the blooming of his youth had been rewarded. Naruto had just rolled his eyes. He would talk to Guy tomorrow about starting sword training. This was a new year, one step closer to his goals. He'd had a taste of freedom and was more determined than ever to make it more permanent. He had a lot to do this year. Naruto ran across the rooftops of Konoha, feeling as though he was flying. This was his favorite time of day. Early morning, the village hadn't quite woken up yet, so it was just him, the crisp morning air and the occasional shinobi. He slid down the slope of a roof, leaping to the next with a wide grin on his face. It had been 2 years since he had been apprenticed to Guy, and his life had started to change for the better. He still didn't have a great relationship with the village, and he was as determined as ever to leave, but he liked the life he had built at present. He didn't even have to talk to the civilians with the way things were now. Sasuke was still very reluctantly getting his groceries for him, making sure to voice his displeasure at the task every single time, and Naruto pretty much lived on the rooftops at this point. He could barely remember the last time he'd had to walk through the streets themselves without Guy accompanying him. They hadn't tried to force a team on him yet either. He was aware he would need one to be allowed to participate in the Chunin exams, but Guy had insisted he wait and build his skills first. Naruto wasn't thrilled about the delay, but he knew there were teams that would need an extra body to attend the exams this year. This was going to be his year. He could feel it. He was already pretty much a Chunin anyway. He was on exclusively C-rank missions, and while he only rarely got to leave the village, it was worlds better than the D ranks. He knew the village and the surrounding lands like the back of his hand at this point with how many patrols he had done. He had even managed to avoid doing too many D ranks. He'd had maybe 5 in the past year, and it had been totally worth it. He wasn't about to let people talk shit about Guy. It gave him time to work on his kenjutsu. He had started working with his clan's swords last January, and he felt like he had a pretty good handle on them now. He still had a long way to go, but they no longer felt wrong in his hands. He'd read that the best swordsmen always said their weapon felt like an extension of their arm rather than something they wield in their hand. He had also discovered that the swords were meant to be used as a duo. That was a steep learning curve. Learning to use one was enough of a challenge, but he was determined to master this style. He owed to his clan. His taijutsu and physical conditioning had come a long way too, but that was no surprise with Guy as a teacher. Kakashi had given him a couple more ninjutsu, but it still wasn't Naruto's favorite speciality. He had been trying to talk the Jounin into teaching him ninjutsu he could use with his swords. The man had insisted that he learned how to use the swords first. Naruto was forced to agree after he managed to slice open his own leg during practice. His bloodline limit hadn't evolved very much, but Kakashi said that it would grow with him. Naruto knew that his eyes were only as useful as the rest of his skills, so he tried not to bother himself about his lack of progress. Another development over the past year was Sasuke. He had kept up his end of the deal and had taught the Uchiha how to tree walk. To Naruto's annoyance, the academy student had picked it up a lot quicker than he had. He felt a little better after showing him water walking. Something about Sasuke looking like a drowned, disgruntled cat was enough to make him smile. He had also managed to learn some things from the Uchiha which he hadn't expected. The Uchiha Taijutsu style was very interesting and very different than what he was learning from Guy. He hopped off the edge of a building, landing lightly onto the dirt beneath him. Guy had said to meet him at the Hokage's office, and he hoped it was for the reason he was thinking. He was overdue to go to the Chunin exams. Guy hadn't changed in the slightest in the last year, and Naruto liked that about him. He was still in the same outfit, still making dumb poses, still yelling at the top of his lungs about the power of youth, still challenging himself in the weirdest ways. Naruto honestly thought he was the best Jounin sensei in Konoha. The man still tried to talk Naruto into matching his outfit though, and he was not having that. He may adore his teacher, but he could also acknowledge that he was a super fucking weirdo. He says that in the fondest way possible. Only he and Kakashi were allowed to say that about Guy too. He will and has fought people that have insulted his teacher's quirks. He still hadn't been able to figure out Guy and Kakashi's whole rivalry thing. He'd had front row seats to most of their challenges, and some of them couldn't even be qualified as challenges as far as he could see. They were keeping score, but the one and only time Naruto had asked what the prize at the end was, he'd gotten 2 blank looks back. He just decided to leave them to it. It made Guy happy at the very least. He nodded at the Chunin guards as he passed them into the building. The shinobi population have always been a bit more dismissive than outright hostile, with some exceptions. Something had changed since he'd graduated the academy though. Instead of the demon brat or little shit or any of the names he had been bestowed over the years, they all just referred to him as Guy's student. That was a huge improvement in his book. He took a moment to knock on the Hokage's door, entering before they had a chance to answer. This was it. He knew it. This was going to be the moment when they would tell him he was going to the Chunin exams. He was so ready. Hiruzen watched Naruto enter and walk up to stand in front of his desk. He really had grown so much since his assignment to Guy. He had grown at least 5 to 6 inches in height, and Hiruzen could see him being as tall as Minato one day, even if he still only barely reached Guy's chest. His blonde hair had been cut short on the sides of his head but kept slightly longer on top. He did recall the boy talking about length bothering him the last time he was in for a mission. He had kept the black trousers, sandals, and bandages, keeping them tied at the bottom on his legs, but his orange sleeveless hoodie had been wrecked on one of his patrols. It was too much to hope the genin would give up on orange altogether. He wore a bright orange t-shirt instead, with a black sleeveless hoodie over it. Bracers covered his forearms, and reinforced fingerless gloves already looked worn with use. He had heard of Naruto's tendency to destroy wooden posts in training exercises. The Uzumaki spiral was displayed prominently between his shoulder blades, hidden beneath the sword strapped across his back. Blue eyes looked determined back at him. Hiruzen didn't know if it was easy or difficult to remember the boy was still only 11. On one hand, he was by far one of the most capable genin in the village. On the other, he still had a habit of pranking people. The threat of D-ranks had deterred the genin, but not enough to stop him entirely. It was curbed enough to protect him from more serious repercussions at the very least. Naruto-kun, it is nice to see you. Hi, Gigi, the genin said, and Hiruzen could see the expectation in his blue eyes. He knew exactly what Naruto was expecting from this meeting and he sighed. It was time to let him down gently. Naruto-kun, you will not be attending the Chunin exams this year either. Naruto's grin fell off his face and Hiruzen could sense him clam up. Why? He asked shortly. The exams are being held in IWA this year, Hiruzen replied gravely. I do not think I need to tell you why you should not be attending these exams. No one from Konoha will be going. I am sorry, but you will need to wait until next year. He could see Naruto's fists clench, but it could not be helped. You know, Gigi, you have never actually told me why I cannot go to IWA specifically. Is there some special reason? Hiruzen shot the boy a sharp look. He understood he was frustrated that he could not earn a promotion for another year, but he was treading into territory best left alone. He knew that Naruto knew who his parents were, but he also knew the boy would keep it to himself. It was a better kept secret than that of the Kyuubi, and Hiruzen had every intention of keeping it that way. Konoha, and IWA for that matter, were not ready to learn the Yellow Flash had a son. He hadn't wanted Naruto to know until he was ready, but the genin had figured it out at some point. That is enough, Naruto, he scolded. That is not why I brought you here today. He took a deep breath and looked at Guy, the Jounin strangely silent during their exchange. The new class graduate next week, and I wanted to ask you if you would take on a team. Guy grinned widely at him. Hokage-sama, I already have one wonderfully youthful genin. He gestured dramatically to still sulking Naruto. I could not possibly part with him before his journey as a genin reaches its conclusion and my student flourishes in the springtime of his youth. I am not asking you to end your apprenticeship, Hiruzen reassured. Naruto will remain your apprentice until he passes the Chunin exams. You would be taking on a team alongside him. I didn't think that was allowed, Naruto spoke up, narrowed eyes boring into Hiruzen. Under normal circumstance, it would not, Hiruzen nodded, leaning back into his chair. However, you are very advanced for your age and rank, Naruto. You can undertake your patrols and C-ranks alone, and I have every confidence in you as an individual operative. You will not leave the village unaccompanied, but you can operate within the village limits independently. You will still train with Guy, but perhaps not to the same extent. So basically I'm a Chunin without the actual rank? Hiruzen ignored that to speak directly to Guy. I have seen how successful you have been with Naruto, and I feel that there are other students in the village that would benefit from your tutelage. Naruto is ready to become a Chunin, and while it is unfortunate, that cannot happen yet. That does not mean that other genin should lose out on a good teacher. The Jounin turned to Naruto. I will leave it up to you, Naruto-kun. Guy sent thumbs up to his genin. You are my student, first and foremost. You are my priority. Hiruzen watched Naruto finally melt from the sulky stance he'd taken up since being told about the Chunin exams. The genin was still resistant to teamwork and reportedly a bit standoffish on missions, but Hiruzen didn't doubt that he cared about Guy a great deal. On any given day, if someone wanted Naruto to do something, Guy needed to be the one to ask. I think you should take another team, Guy-sensei, Naruto finally admitted. You are the best teacher in Konoha. I think you would like more students. More people to spread the youth to. Hiruzen watched the tears well up in Guy's eyes and promptly decided he did not want to deal with what was about to occur. Thank you, I will put your name down, Guy, he said quickly. You may both go. Guy grabbed Naruto and pulled him into a bear hug, tears streaming down his face and mumbling about youth. He walked out of the office with the genin still firmly trapped in his arms. Hiruzen caught sight of Naruto's look of regret just as the door shut behind them. Naruto flopped down onto the grass of the training ground, dumping his swords beside him as he let out a dramatic groan. He thought he would never escape. He was pretty sure the Jounin had bruised some ribs, though they had probably healed by now, so he couldn't prove it. He made a mental note to never mention youth within earshot of Guy ever again. It was not worth it. He didn't care how happy it made the man. Never again. What are you whining about now? Sasuke's stupid face appeared above him, smirking down at him in a way that Naruto was far too familiar with by now. Guess who isn't going to the Chunin exams this year? He grumbled back, sitting up as Sasuke sat himself down beside him. At this rate we're going to be taking them at the same time, Sasuke sniped and Naruto sent an unimpressed glare his way. They say why? It's in IWA this year, Naruto rolled his eyes. Apparently they still have a bunch of murderous feelings about us left over from the Third War. I personally think it would be an even better test for who makes Chunin, but stupid Gigi said no one's going. So you're stuck doing the same genin shit another year? Yup. HN, what is HN supposed to mean? HN gods, I fucking hate you sometimes. Sasuke shoved him over and Naruto let himself fall, staring up at the passing clouds. He and Sasuke had kept to their arrangement that they'd made over a year ago now. They met up once a week to train and for Naruto receive his groceries. He would never admit it out loud, but he had sort of come to maybe not hate these meetups with Sasuke. The Uchiha gave as good as he got. He also didn't slow Naruto down, he actually picked up techniques stupidly fast. It was very annoying. He had miraculously managed to stop Guy and Kakashi from finding out too. It had been tricky, especially in the beginning, but he had settled into a routine with it. He knew it wasn't as big a deal as he was making it out to be, but after this long it had become a point of pride. Guy would have been thrilled, but Kakashi wouldn't shut up about it if he knew. It was just easier for no one to know. Sasuke was even more eager than him to keep it secret. The great Uchiha could not be found to be training with a mere genin after all, least of all the village pariah. Saying that, they'd found themselves training outside of the agreed weekly schedule. There was an unspoken rule that neither of them could acknowledge that they were hanging outside of the designated training times, and Naruto was not about to lose that game. It would ruin what they had going for them, a half-decent training partner that they could be an ass to without any real backlash. Naruto didn't want to give that up. This didn't mean they were friends, Sasuke was just slightly more tolerable than other people his age. So are you just going to mope, or are we going to do something today? Naruto sighed heavily. Maybe I will just mope, he sniped back, putting his hands behind his head in a show of getting comfortable. It's hard work being a shinobi. You academy students wouldn't understand. He closed his eyes, waiting for Sasuke to make his move. He heard the other boy move away in silence, but Naruto didn't dare open an eye. He could not show weakness. It wasn't until he felt the warmth over his skin that he realized what Sasuke was doing. What the fuck, you fucking asshole? Why are you shooting your katan techniques at me? HN, Sasuke replied with a smirk, knowing that he'd won this round. Oh, you asked for it, Naruto snarled, drawing his swords and stalking towards the Uchiha. If Sasuke wanted to train, Naruto would train. If the Uchiha got slightly maimed, then that was his problem. He started it. Naruto was not having fun. He was not. Naruto reluctantly dragged his feet to the academy building. He had no idea why this was classified as a C rank, he personally called bullshit. He didn't see how hauling all the supplies for the graduation exam next week to the building warranted the rank. He secretly thought that Gigi was doing it to punish him for something, but he couldn't think of anything he'd done lately. It's you. Naruto groaned. It was never a good thing when people recognized him. He walked a bit quicker, hoping they would just give up. It worked on the drunk ones. Wait. Please. Naruto tightened his grip on the new target boards. This is why he stuck to the rooftops. No one bothered him on the rooftops. He turned slowly to see a tall boy bouncing towards him, smiling. That was ominous. I have been trying to find you, the boy beamed as he stopped into front of Naruto. He was tall, with round, dark eyes and black hair tied back in a braid. Something nudged at the back of Naruto's mind, but he ignored it. Look, Whatever you think I did, I didn't. Naruto rolled his eyes. So you are just going to have to get over whatever it is and leave me alone. No. I wanted to thank you. The boy insisted, his large round eyes far more earnest than Naruto was comfortable with. Thank me for what? Naruto placed the boards on his hip, confused. He didn't remember this guy. You are the one who inspired me to work my hardest for the exam. The boy's eyes sparkled and he leaned forward. Naruto leaned away. I have done nothing but work on my taijutsu since we last met, and I have every confidence I am going to pass the exam this week. I owe it all to you. Naruto racked his brain. When had he done that? He didn't even like talking to people his age, never mind inspiring anyone. The only person he even spoke to was Sasuke, and there was nothing inspiring about that. He was more likely to call the other boy an ass and call it a day. What? He couldn't help but ask. The boy's smile dimmed a bit. You don't remember me? Naruto squinted at him. Had he met this guy before? He was pretty sure he would remember someone with eyebrows like that. They looked just like guys. The academy student looked back him with disappointment and Naruto frowned. He was more than familiar with that expression. He didn't think it was fair that he didn't know what he'd done to cause it though. No, he said shortly, raising an eyebrow. The boy shook his head, forcing a smile back onto his face. No matter. I did not introduce myself the last we met. The fault is mine. The boy bowed low. I am Rock Lee. I cannot use chakra, and so I feared I would fail the final exam, but I met you and you told me to stop limiting myself and to try my best regardless of my situation. That was me holding myself back, not my lack of chakra. Naruto blinked. That didn't sound like something he would say. That sounded more like Guy. Cool, good for you. Naruto hefted the target boards into a firmer grip. Sounds like I gave some good advice. Now if you're done, I've got to get this done, so, bye. Naruto turned and waved a hand to the boy behind him. That was weird. He was definitely sure he would never say something like Lee was describing. Maybe the academy student had confused him for someone else? But that didn't make much sense considering he didn't look like anyone in the village. The bright blonde hair, the whisker marks on his cheeks, and the orange usually gave him away. He stopped and sighed. This was Guy's bad influence, he knew it was. Hey, if you're serious about taijutsu you should lose the braid. It's a massive weakness, anyone could grab it and use it against you, he called behind him. He didn't turn to look, cursing Guy in his head. He would never have said that before he was apprenticed to Guy. He had been more than happy keeping to himself, avoiding people and telling them to go fuck themselves. His teacher was a terrible influence. He made a mental note to avoid this Rock Lee in the future. He didn't need the hassle. Genma downed the cup of coffee the minute it was placed on the table in front of him. He hated night shift. He hated the adjustment back to daytime hours even more. Radu had kicked him out of the flat, stating that the fresh air would do him some good. Genma knew that was code for, you are being insufferable and I need a break from you. He couldn't hold it against the older man. He was insufferable after night shift. Ebisu sat stiffly across from him, eyeing him with disapproval. You are a shinobi of Konoha, Genma. Have some sense of decorum. Genma just groaned, dropping his head onto the table. He should have just cancelled. He didn't know if he had the energy of meeting up with his old genin team today. Guy was due any moment and he already had a headache building up behind his eyes. Maybe he should pull a Kakashi and just find a tree somewhere. It had just taken ages to get the two back on speaking terms. Ebisu was stubborn in his dislike of Naruto and Guy wouldn't hear of anything negative about his student. It had made for a stressful few months for Genma, who had to mediate between the pair. Choza-sensei had refused to get involved, stating that his involvement in their team drama ended when they became chunins. Genma thought the man was being a coward, but he couldn't blame the clan head. Guy could be scary when he wasn't his normal, happy self. My fellow team, what a most wonderful morning. Ginma groaned louder, failing in his attempt to sink into the wooden table. He loved the guy, he really did after knowing him for so long, but he was so tired. He'd never seen Guy tired, he wouldn't understand the pain of the normal folk. You are usually the first to arrive, Guy, Ebisu raised an eyebrow. Ah, yes. Guy boomed, his laughter carrying all the way down the street. My beloved student mastered a most challenging kata in his kenjutsu today. He is a most wondrous example of youth and I shall strive to keep up with his shining example. Ebisu's face soured and Ginma kicked him beneath the table. He did not make that much of an effort for Ebisu to screw this up. The man should be able to keep his mouth shut at least for a little while. He didn't even get his problem with Naruto. Ginma thought the kid was pretty good. He had never really cared about the whole Kyubi thing. He trusted Minato-sama's work and he knew most jounin his age did too. The kid was a bit grumpy and crass, but he cared about Guy. That was enough for Ginma. That's great, Guy, Ginma yawned. Hey, can you get me, like, 3 more coffees? That much caffeine is terrible for you. Guy turned to dramatically point at him. Your vitality and youth is enough to keep your spirits up. Ginma just stared at him for a long moment. That's just you, Guy-sensei. The 3 of them turned in unison towards the voice. Naruto stood nearby, arms crossed with a playful smirk on his face. It looked identical to Kushina's. Now that was a bit of a wake-up call. He'd grown a few inches since Ginma had last seen him. He shaved the sides of his head and added a couple of swords to his back. He looked good, stronger, less angry than when he'd barged into the Jounin standby station. He saw Ebisu's shoulders rise in irritation and cut in before the uptight man could say something stupid. Thank the gods someone said it, he grinned at the genin. I think Guy is the only one who doesn't appreciate the miracle of caffeine. Naruto looked back at him warily but he lacked the outright hostility from before. Guy had really made a big difference with him. Ginma was glad to see it. Konoha hadn't been there for the kid, but he hoped the genin was starting to see that they weren't against him. The Jounin and Chunin weren't anyway. Yeah, but can you imagine Guy on caffeine? Naruto pointed out and Ginma felt a level of horror he'd only experienced during the war. Guy, promise me you will never drink coffee. Ginma shot up from his seat and grabbed Guy's shoulders, shaking him dramatically. Guy, you have to promise me. Promise. Guy just laughed boisterously and Ginma felt his panic start to rise even higher. That wasn't an answer. That wasn't an answer. Anyway, Guy-sensei, I just came to say I can't make the training tonight, Naruto shrugged, as if he hasn't just suggested an idea that will haunt Ginma's dreams at least for the next month. They have me setting up the shit for the academy exams tomorrow. I have tried to get out of it but GG ain't budging. That is excellent, Naruto-kun, Guy threw an enthusiastic thumbs up at his genin. You will be aiding in the blooming of the next generation springtime of youth. That's one way to put it, Naruto huffed, rolling his eyes. I would call it the dumbest task ever. I'll see you at lunchtime tomorrow at the usual training ground. Tell Kakashi to bring some better jutsu than last time. Naruto turned and started walking down the street, waving lazily over his shoulder. Ginma let go of Guy, slowly sitting back onto the bench. Well, at least he was awake now. Tenten tried not to fidget as she waited nervously for her name to be called. She'd done it. She'd graduated the academy as the top kunoichi and now she would be starting her journey as a genin. The thought of all the weapons she could master made her drool slightly but she held it together. She had to find out who her teammates were first. Team 9 will be Hyuga Niji, Hagane Tenten, and Rock Lee. Your sensei will be Mado Guy. She bounced up from her seat. Niji was the top shinobi this year. He was a super strong teammate to have. Lee was the dead last this year but she'd seen him in the taijutsu exam. He was no joke either. She'd never heard of Mado Guy but she already had high hopes for this team. It was probably going to be more taijutsu focused going by the skill set of her new teammates, but that suited Tenten just fine. Oh, what if Gai-sensei was a weapons expert? That would be amazing. Her thoughts were interrupted by a large man slamming the door open, bounding in with a big smile and boisterous laugh. Her brain stopped for a moment as she took in the tight, green spandex, orange leg warmers and bowl cut. What in Konoha's green earth? Team 9. Follow me to truly flourish in the springtime of your youth. Tenten shared a look with Niji at the man's statement, but she followed him out the door anyway. He did say Team 9, although she didn't know what he meant by youth. Maybe because they were genin? She had to jog to keep up with the man as he strode in the direction of the training grounds. They finally stopped in one and Tenten stood next to her teammates, watching the man with anticipation. Welcome, Team 9. His voice boomed across the empty training ground. I will be your sensei, Mato Gai. I am blessed to be teaching such wonderful and youthful genin such as yourselves, and I look forward to working together to reach the springtime of our youth. He grinned brightly, hands on his hips as he looked down at them. Tenten smiled back awkwardly. This wasn't exactly what she was expecting from her Jounin sensei. What did the whole youth thing mean? I am honored, Gai sensei. Lee yelled from beside her and she winced at the volume. I look forward to working my hardest and blossoming into the best version of Lee I can possibly be. Such youth. Gai cried, and were those real tears? Tenten looked desperately at Niji to make sure she wasn't the only sane one here. Niji was always a bit stoic, but even she could tell he was just as bewildered as she was. Now, Gai announced, clapping his hands together excitedly. Everyone introduced themselves. Your name, specialty, and your goals as a shinobi. I'm Rock Lee. Lee yelled before Tenten or Niji had a chance to respond. I specialize in taijutsu and my goal is to become the greatest taijutsu master in Konoha. What a wonderful goal, Lee. Gai threw him thumbs up. As Konoha's sublime green beast of prey, I will do my utmost to help you achieve your goal and reach the pinnacle of your youth. Gai-sensei. Lee. Tenten watched the pair in horror. Is this what she was going to have to live with from now on? Sure, her teammates were pretty strong, but she didn't relish having to watch this display every day. Gai turned and pointed dramatically at Niji. You. Niji stared back, his blank, pale eyes staring back at their sensei with the opposite level of enthusiasm Lee had shown. Hyuga Niji, taijutsu, he said flatly. My goals do not matter as my path in life has already been predetermined. You're wrong. Lee pointed a finger in his face. Nothing is decided, only our hard work can determine our future. Niji looked at him, unimpressed. With your limitations, your goal is impossible, he folded his arms. Your birth has already dictated your station in life. You would be better to give up now rather than face disappointment. Lee's face turned red and Tenten looked desperately at their new teacher, hoping he would step in before it escalated. The pair had never really gotten on in the academy either, but they'd also never been forced to really work together before. Tenten knew Niji would beat Lee with ease and she didn't want to spend her first day watching her teammates fight. How wonderful to see the will of fire burning so brightly in you both. Gai clapped his hands, delighted. Having a rival will push you to reach heights you would never have thought to reach alone. He's not my rival, Niji snapped, annoyance bleeding through his expression. I will make you acknowledge me. Lee yelled. Tenten hopelessly looked around at her team. Was this even going to work? Her teammates couldn't get along and their sensei seemed to be trying to make it worse. Have no fear, we have not forgotten about you. Gai grinned at her, cutting off Lee's declarations. She flinched and cursed silently. She was this year's top kunoichi, she couldn't be acting like a civilian girl. I'm Hagain Tenten, she said, trying to inject confidence she didn't feel into her voice. I specialize in weapons and my goal is to become the best weapons mistress in Konoha. An honorable goal. Guy threw her a thumbs up. I have no doubt that you will accomplish it in no time. Tenten felt a small smile curve her lips. He may be weird and badly dressed and super loud, but he did seem like he cared. Only time would tell if this team would sink or swim. As Lee lunged for Niji, declaring a practice spar to prove him wrong, she felt like they would find out sooner rather than later. Naruto blew on his ramen before he shoved in another mouthful, watching Guy's new team argue among themselves from his perch in one of the trees surrounding the training ground. The leaves rustled gently around him and the sun lit up his surroundings in a kaleidoscope of green. It was rare that he took a moment like this to just sit and allow the world to move around him. He knew the urge to move and train would creep on him in no time, but for now he was happy to sit in this tree with his ramen, judging Guy's new genin. He watched that Rock Lee kid yell at the Hyuga. He'd been channeling chakra to his ears so he could hear them even from this distance, and he had to say he was unimpressed. This predestined shit the Hyuga was on was garbage. If Naruto kept to the destiny the village had decided for him, then he would be long dead by now. A part of him wanted to beat that mindset out of the other genin, but the other, much larger part of him didn't care enough to get involved. It wasn't his problem, it was Guy's. Although knowing Guy he would just let the Hyuga figure it out himself, believing his newly proclaimed rival would help him. Rock Lee had cut the braid off, but he was still way too loud. He was making challenges that Naruto knew he probably wouldn't be able to back up with his skill set. The girl was almost the opposite. Naruto could already see she was getting overwhelmed by her teammates, and that was no use. What would happen if they were ambushed outside the village? Naruto could guarantee that it would be a hell of a lot more overwhelming than Guy. He hadn't been like this when he'd graduated, had he? Guy really had his work cut out for him, and Naruto fucking knew he would be talked into training with them or helping out. Guy would ask him with that hopeful expression, and Naruto wouldn't be able to let the man down, and then he'd be stuck with these idiots. Guy was wasted on them. Thank the gods he'd never been forced onto a team, it already looked like a nightmare. Got a good seat? Naruto looked over at Kakashi as he stood on a nearby branch, eye smiling at him. What does it look like? He sniped back, gesturing with his chopsticks. Kakashi stepped onto Naruto's branch, deliberately shoving Naruto's legs over the side before looking out to the training ground. Naruto kicked out at him, but the fucker just dodged with ease, not even looking back. He'd been Naruto's bloodline and ninjutsu teacher for almost 2 years now, and they had a very different relationship than the one Naruto had with Guy. He still never called the man sensei, it wasn't even out of deliberate disrespect either. He just never felt like he and Kakashi were student-teacher material. Most of the time, it felt like he was training with an annoying older brother, or what he thought a brother would be like. It wasn't as if he had a reference. They sniped at each other, tried to wind each other up, and did things purely to annoy the other. Guy had once spoken to him about it, concerned that his rival and student weren't being very youthful towards each other. Naruto hadn't been able to explain to the man that this was just how they worked. Naruto enjoyed having someone to push back against while also knowing there would be no hard feelings. He was pretty sure the Jounin felt the same, as he would have probably said something by now. He did respect Kakashi's encyclopedic knowledge of ninjutsu, and he did appreciate the Jounin could wipe the floor with him without breaking a sweat, so he toned it down during the times when Kakashi was actually teaching him stuff. The rest of the time was free game though. Get your own branch, he growled. So aggressive, Naruto-chan, Kakashi said lightly, moving to a thinner branch to their left and whipping out his orange book. Some residual feelings over seeing Guy with other students perhaps? I was the one who told him to do it. Naruto shoved in another mouthful of ramen. Aren't you supposed to be teaching some of your own? I'll see them tomorrow. The Jounin waved a hand dismissively. You mean, you'll fail them tomorrow? Naruto accused good-naturedly. You fail them every year. You never know, this might be the year, Kakashi replied without a drop of conviction in his tone. What are you even looking for? Naruto looked away to see Guy start to fight the genin. He was being so much nicer to them. He hadn't gotten a warning. Guy just ambushed him when he'd reached the training ground. He probably wouldn't have wanted to stand around talking anyway, but that wasn't the point. They're just out of the academy. You know they're pretty useless going in. I do remember you being particularly terrible at the tree climbing exercise. Naruto pouted. He'd gotten the hang of it eventually. He could do them all now. Guy was ruthless when working towards a specific goal like that. You know what I mean. Besides, you're avoiding the question. Kakashi remained silent for a long moment and Naruto took the opportunity to slurp up the rest of the broth and noodles. He took out a scroll, sealing the rubbish to dispose of later. They don't know how to be a team, Kakashi finally replied and Naruto rolled his eyes. Well, duh, he raised an eyebrow at the jounin. The academy is about learning a list of stuff and competing against each other. Why would they work in a team? It's integral to being a shinobi, Kakashi replied with a little heat, actually lowering his book, and Naruto took a deep breath to stop himself snapping back. He and Kakashi had very different ideas about the necessity of teamwork as a shinobi. Kakashi seemed to think that teamwork was the golden rule for all shinobi despite being a fucking loner and avoiding social interaction like the plague. Naruto had been functioning as a solo genin for 2 years and he knew that teammates were bullshit. They would have held him back if anything. If he'd been forced onto a team with anyone he'd graduated with, he would have spent his entire genin career looking over his shoulder. He didn't need to be looking at his back when there were plenty of enemies to fight right in front of him. People couldn't be trusted. They would just let him down or betray him or treat him differently and he didn't have fucking time for it. Kakashi had entirely too much faith in people and Naruto couldn't understand why. They'd had 2 arguments about it in the time that they'd known each other and they were enough to show that they just should avoid talking about it. They would never agree and Naruto did like the man when he wasn't shoving teamwork propaganda down his throat. Naruto looked out to the training ground as the Hyuga slammed down hard into the dirt. He might have the Byakugan, but that wasn't enough against Guy. He was probably too reliant on it, like the rest of his clansmen. That would soon get beaten out of him if Guy uses the same physical conditioning regime that Naruto used back when he first graduated. The girl was light on her feet and better at dodging than he expected, but she was reliant on weaponry. Naruto hadn't seen her try to physically hit Guy once. Weaponry was the better alternative only if you were good at weapons in the first place. At this point, even after months, Naruto knew that in a fight his fists would be more effective than his twin blades. There would be no point in her learning all the weapons if she was shit with them. Lee was pretty good at taijutsu for genin, although Naruto would probably never say it out loud. He had some decent power and he could take the hits Guy's dishing out. He wasn't very creative though. It was like he thought if he did the same thing enough times he would accomplish something. He didn't try a new approach or think of anything on the fly. It limited him in a way that would be trouble later on. Any thoughts? Kakashi prompted knowingly. Naruto stood and fixed his hoodie. They aren't my problem, he said firmly. No point wasting my time when I got my own shit to work on. Kakashi gave him a look that said he knew Naruto was talking out of his ass, but he was going to let him get away with it for now. It pissed Naruto off. Just because Guy got some more students didn't mean Naruto had to talk or train with them. He didn't care how they did. As long as Guy was still there to train him, that was all he cared about, and he knew Guy would never abandon him. How has your katan been? Kakashi gave him an out and Naruto took it. I set fire to 2 trees yesterday, he grinned back. We should test your affinity sooner rather than later, Kakashi eyed him carefully. You should have more control by now. Bold of you to assume I didn't do it on purpose. Naruto shot him a look before he started to make his way down the tree trunk. Now come on, you look like you have nothing better to do, so train me in that futon jutsu you taught me last week. I think I've figured out a way to do it with a sword. I've told you before, learn how to use the swords, then add ninjutsu, Kakashi said exasperatedly as he followed him down, his nose still stuck in his book. How many times do you need to stab yourself with your sword for that to stick? Hey, I am very close to finding a Kenjutsu teacher, Naruto defended himself. The QB took care of his wounds in minutes anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. Besides, you said we would start using my bloodline with them now. I say many things, you rarely listen, Kakashi shot back under his breath, and Naruto felt a small, genuine smile creep onto his face. He walked a little quicker so Kakashi wouldn't see. No need for the man to start getting a big head. Sasuke stomped into the training ground. He'd thought that his fourth year in the academy would be different. Not that much different, it was still the academy after all, but they were less than a year from graduating. He thought they would begin to learn skills they could apply to future missions or more intensive ninjutsu or taijutsu, something other than memorizing the lists of boring facts or throwing blunted kunai at a target or beating the same lazy classmates that had been wasting his time since day one. He had thought wrong. If he had someone decent to compete against, it wouldn't have been so bad. He would still have come out on top, but at least he would have felt like he was getting stronger. As it stood, his entire class was useless. The boys were lazy and undisciplined. The only one who even bothered was Shino, and even then he was nowhere close to Sasuke's level. The girls were even worse. They called themselves his fangirls, but he wanted nothing to do with them. They were a nuisance, and if it was Sasuke's choice, none of them would be at the academy. Are we making a habit of stomping into the training ground? Naruto quipped from where he was stretching. I mean, I started it, but I want to know if it's becoming a thing. It seems like it's a thing. Sasuke could only growl at him as he started his own stretches. He hadn't expected much when he and Naruto had first started training together. He just wanted to learn the tree climbing exercise and go on with his life. Instead, he'd found a decent opponent who could not only keep up with him, but in some areas surpassed him. It was actually refreshing to have someone he could go all out against every time, and he did feel that after a year, he had truly gotten one step closer to taking down Itachi. It made the situation at the academy all the more frustrating. What crawled up your ass? He looked up to see Naruto now standing over him with an eyebrow raised and arms crossed. He'd abandoned the black sleeveless hoodie in the training ground somewhere, so Sasuke was assaulted with a full view of the Genin's awful orange t-shirt. Do you have to wear that eyesore? He snapped instead of answering. Hey, the only eyesore right now is your face, Naruto sniped back. What your fangirls see in you, I'll never fucking understand. Sasuke twitched slightly at the mention of the harpies, and Naruto grinned. Sasuke just glared. He hated when Naruto did this. For someone so upfront and direct, he was a sneaky shit when he wanted to be. So it was them, Naruto mused. Hey, I told you, just scare them or something. If you make yourself enough of an asshole, they'll back off. That would just make things worse, Sasuke huffed. The worse he tried to treat them, the worse they got. There was no winning. Well, you were the one who wouldn't take my suggestion to just beat one of them up to send a message. I am not beating up someone that fucking weak, and we can't fight classmates outside of class. I said to beat them up during taijutsu practice. It's the best excuse. Sasuke just shook his head. He'd unfortunately gotten to know Naruto quite well during their year of training. The blonde had a very skewed way of thinking, even compared to Sasuke. He was like a stray dog that bit anyone that came close, except for his chosen few. He was so averse to talking to people. Sasuke knew about his goal to one day leave the village. He'd never really had someone who could not only match him, but had goals as big as Sasuke's before. Sasuke had thought about setting Naruto on his fangirls before, but that would first of all imply that they were friends, and second of all, Naruto would definitely go too far. He'd heard of some of his exploits against his own academy classmates. He might have gone mad a while ago if it wasn't for these meetups with Naruto. The blonde had a way of trading Sasuke's anger for annoyance, but a good annoyance if it was possible. It was just nice to have someone not trying to kiss his ass. The rest of the village put him on a pedestal as the last Uchiha, but he hated it. Itachi put him there. The only reason he was the last was because he'd lost his whole clan. It wasn't something he thought of in a positive light. Naruto was an asshole, but he also gave Sasuke the freedom to also be an ass. He didn't have to watch his words or put up with bullshit. He could just punch him in the face and call him a dick and Naruto would grin, get back up and kick him in the gut while calling him a bitch. It was a weird dynamic, but it was one Sasuke didn't want to lose. They weren't friends, but out of the entire village, Naruto was the only one Sasuke could be himself around. He would die before admitting it aloud though. He stood, stretching his arm across his body. Taijutsu only to start. Naruto bounced backwards, grinning widely as his eye flashed silver. Sasuke had not been expecting the other boy to possess a bloodline limit, especially one so similar to the Sharingan. He hadn't been able to activate his yet, but it did mean that the blonde was nearly impossible to beat in a straight taijutsu spar. Sasuke vowed he would beat him soon, and right now, he just wanted to hit something. He moved first and Naruto ducked, following the movement with a hit of his own, and Sasuke dodged, the rhythm of their spar soon banishing thoughts of the academy. Neji stood straight as his team waited around the training ground. It had been 2 days since he'd been assigned to Team 9 and he did not like it. Ten was an acceptable teammate, being the only girl worth her salt in the academy, but Lee was impossible. The boy refused to understand that their paths were already formed at birth. There was nothing they could do to escape this fate. He himself was fated to be a servant for the main house, to one day die in service to them, and there was not a single thing he could do about it. Lee would soon see the errors of his ways. Someone like him did well to pass the exam, but he would not be able to reach his goals. It was not possible for someone of his ability. It was not Lee's fault that the circumstances of his birth have hindered him. The only fault of his is refusing to acknowledge that fact. He still was not sure of what to think of their Jounin sensei. He was loud, brash, optimistic to a fault, and yet exceptionally strong. Neji had not been able to land a single hit in their first battle, and he had not had an opportunity since, as Gai-sensei had started them on a training regime. He'd barely been able to still fit clan training in the busy schedule. Gai had told them he had a new opponent to test their youth against, whatever that meant. Neji was not sure who would be worth their time when they already had Gai-sensei to defeat. The Jounin had been vague about it, although Neji was able to see that he'd barely been able to keep it to himself. The man was literally vibrating with excitement. His thoughts were interrupted as he spotted what looked like another genin entering the training grounds. He was short, closer to Tenten's height than him or Lee. He had spiky blonde hair, shaved close on the sides and longer on top, with no Hitai in sight. He wore close-fitting black trousers, black sandals, and an open, black sleeveless hooded sweater with a loose, orange t-shirt beneath. The hilts of 2 katanas could be seen just over his shoulders, and he had unusual whisker marks on his cheeks that Neji had never seen before. His face was turned down into a scowl and his blue eyes were closed off. He walked reluctantly up to them, hands shoved in his pockets as he looked them over. "You owe me a week's worth of ramen for this, Gai-sensei," the boy spoke, his voice flat and unimpressed. "Of course, Naruto-kun." Gai-sensei laughed, clapping the boy heavily on the shoulder. Niji's eyes narrowed as this Naruto didn't even flinch. He knew the weight Gai-sensei threw behind those pats. "I thought this was the most opportune moment for my wonderful genin to meet. You will be able to help each other reach new heights and truly blossom in the springtime of your youth." "I ain't helping shit," Naruto scowled. "This is a one-time thing, understand? They're your team, not mine. I don't care how sad you look next time." They were interrupted by Lee. "Naruto-kun." He grinned, eerily reminiscent of their Jounin sensei. "I am so happy to learn your name. Thank you for your wonderful advice last time we met." Naruto shrunk away from Lee, looking like he would rather be anywhere else but here. "Naruto-kun, have you already met Lee-kun?" Gai-sensei looked thrilled. "No," the blonde crossed his arms. "Whatever, we're burning daylight. Are we going to do this or not?" Gai-sensei clapped his hand. "You make a wonderful point, My apprentice. Apprentice? This is Uzumaki Naruto. Guy introduced, dramatically sweeping his hands to present the grumpy genin. He has been my diligent apprentice for the last 2 years, and you will find no one more youthful in the village. He has agreed to spar with you today. I thought you couldn't have a team and an apprentice at the same time. Tenten asked, speaking for the first time. I'm pretty independent, Naruto answered. Guy-sensei still trains me, but I do missions on my own and stuff. So you never had a team? She replied curiously. Nope. Niji wondered about that. It was unheard of for a genin not to be assigned to a team, let alone be apprenticed straight out of the academy. Naruto, I would ask that you refrain from using your weaponry, but all else is encouraged. Guy threw him thumbs up. Naruto shrugged, wandering away to stretch. Guy turned to them excitedly. Naruto is on his way to becoming one of the best taijutsu masters in Konoha, he said without an inch of doubt. You will learn a great deal from him. He is very skilled and hardworking. Following his example will lead you to become very strong indeed. It was the most serious Niji had seen Guy-sensei since meeting him only a couple of days ago. He had never understood the bond between master and apprentice, but perhaps he would gain more insight from this. He watched the genin stretch briefly before walking back to them, shoving his swords at Guy. He turned to them, his face still turned down into a deep scowl as if they were an inconvenience to him. Niji scoffed. He did not appreciate this genin looking down on him. He could not be that good if he had thus failed to become a chunin. Alright, let's do this. Naruto scanned them with annoyance. Anything goes. I look forward to learning from you, Naruto-senpai. Lee bowed, his head almost bouncing off the ground in his enthusiasm. I'm younger than you, Naruto replied, leaning away in physical discomfort. Wait, how old are you then? Tenten cut it, and Niji was curious to hear his answer too. He did look young, but he carried himself as someone who had long left the academy behind. Niji had assumed he just had a young face. Old enough, he answered evasively at the same time as Guy-sensei announced, 11. So you graduated at, what, 9? She asked, eyes slightly wide. Does it matter? Naruto sighed, exasperated. Niji may have to revise his assumptions about him. It was difficult to graduate early in an age of peace. It spoke to the skill the genin must possess, but it was curious that he was reluctant to reveal that fact. Most genin Niji knew would be boasting that information. Nevertheless, Naruto-senpai, you are our senior in experience, and I wish to show you the respect you deserve. Lee burst back in, eyes sparkling as he stared at Naruto. Such a beautiful display of youth. Guy-sensei joined Lee in his exuberance. Can we just get this over with? Naruto crossed his arms, looking at Guy-sensei. I do have things to do today. Of course, Naruto-kun. Guy grinned at him. Niji watched them carefully, cataloging their interaction. They were so different. Guy was open and happy and free, and Naruto was grumpy and hostile and closed off. He could not see how they could have worked together for what would be 2 years now. It did not make sense. He dismissed those thoughts as he prepared his stance, his teammates readying themselves around him. It was no matter. The outcome of this battle has already been decided. All he could do was follow the path placed down before him. Fate would decide the victor. Naruto watched the trio carefully. From what he knew of them so far, Lee would hit first. Niji would wait for the right moment, and Tenten would try and nail him from afar with one of her weapons while the boys distracted him. It had been the pattern that emerged from their fight with Guy-sensei, and he knew they wouldn't have changed it in 2 days. That made things simple. Lee sped forward and swung a fist, and Naruto grinned viciously. He ducked out of the way of the telegraphed move and grabbed the taller boy's arm, locking his knees and flinging him into the dirt. That had given the Hyuga time to creep up on his right and shove a palm out. Naruto dodged around that too, observing the pale Byakugan in his eyes. He'd never had the chance to get a look this close before. It was a damn good bloodline limit, but the clansmen were too arrogant to admit it had weaknesses. Guy Sensei had said anything goes, but he knew there were still limits. He couldn't hospitalize them or cause permanent damage. Honestly, if this was an enemy in the field, he would just chop his hands off. It would make it damn hard to use his clan's jutsu then. He bobbed and swayed around the Hyuga's jabs. He was fast for a green genin, but his stance was too rigid. He couldn't adapt quick enough. He led him towards Tenten and she moved, flinging 3 kunai at him. She was quick too, but needs to work more on moving targets. He grabbed 2 out of the air, spinning to avoid Niji's next blow, and flung them right at Lee's face, allowing the third to slice through a part of his hoodie. The genin had been getting closer to their fight and was forced to duck out of the way of the sharp blades. Niji took this moment to jab at one of Naruto's central chakra points, and Naruto slapped his forearm to the side with a flat palm and kicked Niji square in the chest. The Hyuga was forced back, the air being audibly knocked out of him. The Hyuga he went to the academy with had the same issue. Straight arms were pretty easy to shove to the side if you were quick enough. He wasn't doing too badly. It was tougher than fighting Sasuke just from the numbers advantage, but it was a whole lot easier than Guy Sensei. His teacher had never once gone easy on his during their apprenticeship, and Naruto was delighted to see the results of this finally coming through. Lee flung himself into the opening and threw a punch at Naruto's face. He was just barely able to raise his arms, taking the punch on his forearms. It actually stung a little, and Naruto had to admit that Lee might be physically stronger than him. Lee! The boy jumped back and Naruto turned in time to see a wall of shuriken coming his way. His hands flew through the hand signs automatically. Futon, Bufukyuzu no Jutsu, he called out, feeling the wind swirl up around him and push outwards. The many shuriken were swept up in his technique, scattering them across the sky haphazardly. Most fell to the ground without any issues, but some were knocked back into Tenten herself. She dove to the side to avoid her own weapons as the wind started to die down. Naruto was lucky that Kakashi liked to test his grasp on ninjutsu by ambushing him. The Jounin had pulled the same kind of trick 4 months ago. It hadn't gone as well. He faced the 3 genin, grinning. They all faced him, having come together in a group in the wake of his technique. Each of them looked a bit ruffled, and Naruto considered them for a moment. He could probably overwhelm them with ninjutsu, since it was apparent none of them knew any themselves. On the other hand, he much preferred to beat them with his own 2 hands. It would be more educational anyway, and it wasn't like he was Guy Sensei. They would get much worse from him as his students. He would know. "You're so strong, Naruto-senpai," Lee called out to him, beaming. "Or you're just weak," he called back, grinning as he saw the other 2 genin bristle. Lee was unfazed. "We have much to learn from you, senpai." Lee laughed. "Let us continue our battle and push ourselves to new heights in our training." "The outcome of his battle has already been decided," Niji spoke up. "You're right," Naruto folded his arms. "You're going to lose." Despite his fate bullshit, Naruto could tell Niji was getting angry at him. Naruto was a little annoyed at him too, so he kept pushing. "Why bother to fight at all?" he taunted. "Just lie down and die if that's what fate has in mind for you." "Fate has decided your path too," Niji snapped back. "We cannot escape the circumstances of our birth." Naruto narrowed his eyes. This asshole was really starting to annoy him now. "Fate can go fuck itself," he retorted. "I make my own path." "You should not try to exceed your natural limitations," Niji sniped back. "You should know your place." Something snapped in Naruto at that phrase, that fucking phrase that people have been using against him his whole damn life. According to the village, it was Naruto's fate to fail and die, taking the Kyuubi with him. He'd been fighting what others had decided was his place his whole life, and this green genin had the gall to tell him to know his place. He looked at the newly formed team, having eyes only for the Hyuga. He lunged forward, throwing a punch at Tenten. She blocked with one arm and retaliated instinctively, but Naruto grabbed her fist and drove it into the ground. He spun and brought his leg up, slamming it into the side of her lowered head, and she crumpled like a leaf. The other two stared at him for a moment, not expecting the quick and vicious attack. Naruto ignored Gai-sensei's voice announcing Tenten's defeat as he channeled chakra into his hands, grabbing a chunk of earth to hurl at the Hyuga. He deflected it easily, but it kicked up a cloud of smoke, which is exactly what Naruto wanted. He dove towards Lee and managed to land a kick to his side before the taller genin started to fight back. Naruto blocked each blow, knowing it probably bruise, but he couldn't feel it through his fury. He needed this idiot out of the way. He cursed as he activated his bloodline limit. He wanted to beat them without it. Lee was too good and Naruto needed him out of the way before Neji found the opening he was looking for. He danced back a few steps as Lee gained on him, then he saw it. He moved and Lee automatically followed, eyes widening as his feet got tangled up and he lost his balance. Lee managed to recover into a back handspring, but Naruto had accounted for this. He slammed his foot into Lee's exposed back and genin went down. He stomped on his arm and felt the bone giving away beneath his foot. Lee called out in pain, but Naruto didn't even register it, turning to face his true foe. Gai-sensei called Lee out and Naruto ducked beneath Neji's outstretched arm. He dances out of reach of the Hyuga and stares at him with burning eyes. "I don't need them," the Hyuga said coldly. "They are weak, they would not have changed the outcome of this fight. You're a coward." Neji narrowed his eyes, the pale Byakugan still activated. "What?" "I said you are a fucking coward," Naruto said back slowly, venom dripping from his voice. "You are a coward who blames fate when things are shit. You don't take responsibility for your own life. You act like this poor victim of fate and shove that into everyone else's faces, but the truth is you use it as an excuse for your own weakness." Neji couldn't hide his own rage at Naruto's words. He lunged forward and Naruto met him blow for blow. He was careful to make sure Neji's glowing hands didn't touch him and his own bloodline limit was singing. He could see each of Neji's movements in perfect clarity, and since he was faster than the Hyuga, he could actually do something about them. It was a big change from constantly losing to Kakashi. He landed a punch on Neji's face and forced the genin back. He twisted to avoid Neji's retaliation and swept his legs. Neji just barely avoided going down, but Naruto gave him the time to recover. He wasn't done with him yet. This happened again and again. Naruto stole the advantage but allowed Neji the space to recover. He could see the frustration in the Hyuga's face, but he was uncompromising. The rage had refined itself into a sharp fury, and Naruto didn't just want to beat this boy, he wanted to destroy him. He wanted to take his stupid ideas about fate and smash them until they were unrecognizable. Fighting awful hard for someone who thinks this battle is already decided, he sneered as Neji panted before him. The genin was covered in dirt and his once impeccable uniform was torn and rumpled. His long hair was tangled and his pale eyes were burning with rage. He didn't know what he himself looked like, but he didn't really care. He heard Gai-sensei say his name, but Naruto ignored him. He couldn't stop now. Why bother training? Why become a genin? If your entire life is predestined, why bother? He pushed. "I was born to the branch family," Neji spat. "I was born to be servant to the main house. I'm better, stronger than half of them, but that will never matter. I am bound by my birth, as are you. So what if you were born a servant?" Naruto shot back. "If you're not happy with that shit, then change it." "I can't." Neji screamed at him, tearing off his hetae to reveal a seal on his forehead. "I have been branded with my destiny. 1 foot wrong and they can tear me right back down. I cannot fight my destiny. If they tear you down, build yourself back up faster. It doesn't work like that. Have you even tried? Yeah, you were born with a shit lot in life, but guess what? So are loads of people." Naruto yelled. "What are you going to do when they brand the next person? watch and tell them that they just have to suck it up? This question seemed to stop Niji short, but Naruto just continued. My destiny was to die, he raged. Everyone in this godforsaken village have been telling me that since I was born. Did I roll over and die? Fuck no. I'm going to become one of the strongest fuckers in this hellhole and all of them will have to eat shit. He took a deep breath, muttering, Katan, Injiki. Orange flames flashed into existence over his closed fists. He sped forward and Niji was unable to block in time, fatigue dragging his limbs down. Naruto landed a fist square on his jaw and Niji hit the deck. He let his jutsu go as he stared down at the Hyuga. You don't like the way things are, he said, his volume lower. Then do something about it. Whining isn't going to change anything. He doesn't look at Guy-sensei as he stomps out of the training grounds. Kakashi entered the training ground to find Naruto punching his favorite log. The genin ignored his presence and Kakashi waited patiently, bringing out his book to flick through as he waited for Naruto get fed up with being watched. What? Naruto finally snapped, twirling around to glare at him. Did you have fun yesterday? The genin's face soured immediately. Of course you were watching, you bastard. He turned away and resumed hitting the log a little harder than before. Kakashi just continued watching him. Naruto had changed since they met 2 years ago, in more ways than one. Skill-wise he was growing at an incredible rate, which could be attributed to his endless stamina and single-minded determination when it came to training. He would be a force of nature when he was older, especially if he learned to handle his swords properly. Kakashi could see him as an elite jounin one day and he had no doubt Naruto would make it happen, hell or high water. He could probably take the Chunin exams tomorrow. He was also less resistant to ninjutsu. He preferred to incorporate it into his taijutsu, but they'd made a lot of progress. He was very good with wind techniques in particular, although fire wasn't far behind. His control over his bloodline limit too had come on leaps and bounds. He was just about fast enough to keep up with it now, and he knew that both the bloodline limit and Naruto's speed would only keep increasing, like it did for Minato-sensei. The biggest area Kakashi had seen the change was in his attitude. He was still grumpy and a contrary little shit, but he wasn't so rough around the edges now. He wasn't as angry and had stopped lashing out over the little things. He poked fun at Kakashi but not maliciously, and Kakashi gave as good as he got. He was avoidant of the villagers, but he also hadn't seen him clash with any of them in ages. Guy had softened the boy, not that Naruto would ever admit that. It was pretty funny to see their dynamic sometimes, overly positive, rambunctious Guy with grumpy, vulgar Naruto. The thing that made it funnier was that it was clear how much Naruto adored Guy. He would tell everyone else to go fuck themselves, but if Guy asked, he followed instructions perfectly. One word from Guy was enough to stop Naruto in his tracks. Kakashi knew he and Naruto got on, in their own way, but nothing came close to the loyalty Naruto had for Guy. He was the only adult that he trusted. It had been a while since he'd seen Naruto snap like he did yesterday. The fact that he had ignored Guy was an even bigger deal. He'd overheard their battle and knew there wasn't much that could have been done to prevent the outcome of the fight. Niji and Naruto would have clashed over their viewpoints at some point, and he honestly hoped that he'd managed to knock some sense into the Hyuga. That kind of attitude would not fly as a shinobi. Kakashi suspected there was something deeper to this though. He'd known the minute Guy had been assigned a new team that there would be the risk of Naruto becoming jealous. He'd had Guy all to himself for 2 years and was extremely attached to the jounin. Now he had to share him with people around his age, who he didn't like on a good day. It didn't seem like it was an issue yet, but it might be something he'd have to talk to Guy about. Naruto didn't trust adults and he couldn't afford to lose the only one he did. I have something for you. Naruto let loose one final hard punch and turned back to him, waving a hand for him to get on with it. Kakashi smiled and held out a piece of paper. Naruto took it, frowning. I promised you chakra paper, he explained. Fucking ages ago, Naruto shot back, turning over the slip in his hand. Late for fucking everything. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. He was in a very foul mood today. Channel your chakra into it. Naruto did as told without further comments, and the page split cleanly down the middle. Wind, Kakashi announced. As I suspected. Are we done now? Naruto scowled. Are you still angry about yesterday? Kakashi asked directly. They're all fine. The hospital didn't keep them. They're all healed up and on D ranks with Guy as we speak. Naruto's face darkened. They don't deserve him, he muttered petulantly. Irrelevant, Kakashi answered flatly. Guy isn't earned, and it's not a matter of deserving. Can you tell me that they are not going to better off for training with him? Naruto's silence was deafening. Do you think Guy is mad at you for yesterday? Naruto glared at the ground in response. Guy knows you're an asshole, Kakashi said, trying to lighten the mood a little. He doesn't hold it against you. Look, you don't have to lie to me, Naruto snapped. I know I went too far for a spar. Kakashi looked at him for a long moment. Was Naruto feeling guilty? That was something he'd never seen from the kid before. You did. Naruto gestured helplessly to the air. I know he wanted me to stop, but that Hyuga needed a kick up the ass, he said, a little quieter. True, Kakashi agreed, not commenting on Naruto's surprised expression at his response. I also think there was a better way to go about it than losing your temper and stomping on some green genin. Naruto scoffed, but Kakashi could tell he was listening. How long are you going to avoid Guy? Naruto clicked his tongue in annoyance and turned back to his log. Kakashi took that as his answer and made his way out of the training ground. Guy and Naruto would be fine. He would give it a week before Naruto got over himself enough to apologize. Naruto ran across the rooftops, not sparing a glance for the bustling village below. It had been 2 days since he beat Gai-sensei's new genin, and the awful, twisty feeling his gut hadn't subsided. He'd never had this before, and he hated it. He'd never worried about effect of his actions before, since it was mainly directed at people who deserved it or it was a necessity at the time. He didn't feel guilty about taking Lee and Tenten out of the fight. He was a little ruthless about it, but they were trying to be shinobi. That was nothing compared to what would be waiting for them in the future. He also didn't feel guilty about his actions towards Neji. He needed to get a clue, and Naruto wouldn't have even bothered if the prick hadn't told him to know his place. He didn't do it to help, he just wanted to knock him down a peg or two. It was every time he thought of Gai-sensei that the discomfort began. He hadn't listened when Gai-sensei had said his name to stop, and he did enough damage that they needed the healers. He felt dread at the thought of having disappointed Gai-sensei, and he had no idea what to do. It was something he'd never experienced before, so he had taken to just avoiding them all. He missed his training session with Guy early this morning, sending a hawk to inform him that he was too busy with missions to attend. It wasn't even a lie, since he'd gone to the mission assignment desk and asked for every single C rank going. He was on his 4th, and it was only midday. The distraction helped, but he felt stuck. This would never have happened if he hadn't told Gai-sensei to get a team. He slightly regretted agreeing to it now. He couldn't argue Kakashi's point that they would benefit from Gai-sensei's teaching, since he was the best taijutsu teacher in the whole village, but they would have been fine with any Jounin sensei. Naruto only had Guy, no one else would have treated him fairly. He bounced across to the next rooftop, rolling to break his fall. Since he was apprenticed to Guy, he couldn't leave the village on missions without him, but there was plenty to do in the village itself. Guard duty didn't start for another 2 hours, so Naruto had taken all the delivery missions available. He was almost finished though. He might have to see if he could start guard duty early. As he bounded across the next roof, he caught a glimpse at the road below. He spotted a man in a Jounin uniform walking along, talking to a purple-haired woman. The thing that caught his attention though was the katana strapped to his back. Naruto stopped in his tracks and peered over the edge of the roof at the pair, deciding that his client could wait a couple of minutes. He was pretty plain, wearing black shinobi clothes and an olive green Jounin vest. Floppy brown hair hung out of the navy bandana that covered his head, but Naruto couldn't see his face from here. He was a little taller than the woman, but his body language was weird. He seemed tired and he kept coughing like he had a bad cold or something. He might not be active if he was sick. The woman was dressed in the same black shinobi clothes and Jounin vest. The only difference was her shirt was sleeveless, replacing them with black gloves to her biceps. Her long, straight hair hung down to her waist and she seemed better, not coughing at all. Naruto hadn't seen them around before, but he tended to avoid everyone, so that wasn't new. He followed them as they walked towards the edge of the village, away from the busy marketplace. Naruto had thought he'd managed to get away with it when the guy looked up. "You going to tell us why you're following us?" Naruto walked down the side of the building until he faced them on the road. Now he was closer, the guy looked even worse. His skin was pale and the bags beneath his eyes were dark. His cheeks were slightly sunken in, and even as Naruto looked at him, the man coughed into a handkerchief. The woman was watching him with curious brown eyes, much more tan than her companion. "Do you know how to use that katana?" Naruto asked, straight to the point. "I like to think so," the man replied easily. Naruto debated with himself for a moment. He didn't want to ask for help, but he wasn't getting very far with the scrolls he'd gotten from the capital last year. He followed the katas and images on the pages, but he had no idea if he was doing it right. He wanted to master his ancestors' techniques and combine them with his bloodline limit, but that required a teacher. "Would you teach me?" he said reluctantly. "Are you a dual wielder?" the man responded, gesturing to the sword strapped to Naruto's back. "I want to be," he confirmed. "I have a bunch of scrolls about my clan Kenjutsu, but I need someone to teach me the basics. You're the first person I've seen that actually carries one. Do we get a name?" The woman interrupted, amused. Naruto was sure they already knew his name, but if he was even going to start convincing them, he should at least try to be polite. "Uzumaki Naruto," he stated firmly, watching them carefully for their reaction. They shared a look and Naruto prepared for the worst. "Guy's student," the man confirmed, and Naruto blinked. That wasn't usually people's first thought. "Yeah," he said slowly. The man nodded. "I can, but not very often." He stopped to cough. "I can teach you for a couple hours a week, but a lot of the work will still be done on your own. I'll also need to look at those scrolls you mentioned. Sound good?" Naruto didn't reply at first, just staring at the Jounin. It couldn't be that easy. Nothing was ever that easy, especially for him. This guy had to know who he was, what he contained. He couldn't even buy groceries without a world of hassle, yet he gets a Kenjutsu teacher like that. He was expecting to have to fight tooth and nail to convince this guy to even consider it. "You alright?" the woman asked in a gentle tone. Naruto mentally shook himself. He could wonder about this later. He would have to keep watch for ulterior motives or the usual bullshit, but even if he got one lesson out of this, that was one more from where he was right now. He would never get strong enough if he let chances like this pass him by. "Yeah," he agreed. "That sounds good. I'm Gecko Hey8, the man introduced himself. Just call me Hey8. This is my girlfriend Yuzuki Yugao. She's also a Kenjutsu user, so you might be able to pry a few tips out of her now and then." Yugao rolled her eyes fondly. Naruto could tell the pair of them were close. "I have to go," he gestured to the bag on his back. "What day and time?" "Sunday noon should work for me." "And what do you want for it?" Naruto couldn't stop himself from asking. Hey8 gave him a long, measured look that Naruto didn't know how to read. "Don't worry about it," he smiled, turning to cough into his handkerchief once again. Naruto would do nothing but worry about it. People didn't do things for free, there was always a price. Guy-sensei was the only person he knew that was the exception to this rule, and he hadn't met another since. He nodded anyway and gave them a small wave, walking his way back up the side of the buildings to the rooftops. He would worry about it later. Right now he had a genin team to avoid. Ten pulled the weed from the ground, dumping it into the bag next to her. Deer rank were not nearly as exciting as they'd been described at the academy. Painting fences, fetching groceries, and weeding gardens made it feel like she was just doing chores rather than real missions, but they made up for it by training a lot outside of them. It had become apparent during their fight with Guy's apprentice that they still had a long way to go. She'd been taken out first, but she hadn't been knocked out completely, so she was able to hear what Niji and Naruto were yelling about. She'd always admired Niji's strength. It was hard not to when he was the strongest person in their class by a huge margin. His taijutsu was so smooth, and she was amazed that he could be so good at their age. He'd always seemed more mature too. He was just really cool. She knew he believed in fate and stuff, but hadn't really thought much of it. Most of the time in the academy when he'd brought it up, it had been to tell others they would lose to him, and it had come true every time. She hadn't realized how deep it went. No one had ever challenged Niji on his philosophy before, and Naruto had stomped all over it. Guy had gathered them round after their visit to the healer and gave feedback on their fight. He'd finished it by saying that Naruto would be the best person to tell them what they needed to work on since he was the one fighting them, but they would need to wait as Naruto was on missions. He'd said it much more dramatically and with several references to youth, but Ten was slowly learning to speak Guy. Niji had been quiet since the fight, and Lee had gotten even more intense about everything, but Ten was more concerned about herself. Looking back at the fight, she hadn't done anything. Her weapons had been so easily swept aside by jutsu, and she hadn't even landed a hit on Naruto. Guy-sensei bounded over to him. "You are so youthful, working so hard on the behalf of Konoha. When I was informed about the number of missions you have undertaken this week, I was so moved. Your will of fire is burning so brightly for all to see." Naruto blinked. Guy-sensei had to know Naruto had done it to avoid him, not for the village's benefit. Why was he playing dumb? Team 9 had been working even harder since your battle. Guy-sensei continued cheerfully. Your shining example of youth have moved them too, and they are striving to blossom in their own springtime of youth. He couldn't stand this. Why wouldn't Guy-sensei just get it over with? "I know you're mad," Naruto sighed. "You don't have to pretend to be happy or whatever." Guy-sensei raised a bushy eyebrow at him. "Why would I be angry, Naruto-kun?" "I went too far," he admitted reluctantly. "I beat up your new team and yelled at them and stuff." "You fought them honestly," Guy-sensei replied seriously. "You fought them to the best of your abilities, and while your anger was strong, you did not let it take over completely. Your words to Niji-kun may have been born from anger, but they were not intended to hurt. You wished to expand his perception of himself and others around him. But I didn't stop when you told me to." Naruto snapped back, unable to believe that Guy really wasn't mad. "I do not recall asking you to cease fighting." Guy-sensei placed his hands on his hips. Naruto stopped short. "But you said my name." "I was moved by the depth of your feelings." Guy-sensei smiled at him, softer than his usual manic grin. "Naruto-kun, you are a very passionate shinobi. When I asked you to fight our team, I knew you would push them beyond their own limitations so that they can continue to flourish into strong shinobi. You did your best and did not hold back, which is all I can ask of my students." Naruto was at a loss. Guy-sensei wasn't mad at him. He didn't go too far. He knew Guy valued him as student, but he'd been his only student. He doubted that with the addition of new, non-pariah genin that Guy-sensei would see him the way he did before. Everyone favored other people over him, and he wasn't usually bothered by it, but this was Guy-sensei. He didn't want to lose his teacher. "I believe they learned valuable lessons from you." Guy-sensei grinned, his usual energetic demeanor returning. "The strength of your feelings made it through to them." Naruto felt himself relax. Guy-sensei really wasn't mad at him. He hadn't fucked this up. He knew he was a bit difficult, but Guy-sensei had never cared before. It appeared that the only person that had thought things would change with the new team was Naruto. Guy-sensei was still there for him and cared about Naruto for exactly who he was. Thanks, Guy-sensei, he smiled genuinely up at his teacher. Guy-sensei beamed back at him. Anytime, Naruto-kun. You are my precious apprentice and I will always be here to help you reach the peak of your springtime of youth. Naruto just continued smiling, hoping that Guy-sensei would never change. Naruto frowned as he waited for the Hokage to finish with his papers. He couldn't think of anything he'd done recently to get into trouble. He made up with Guy and his new genin were no worse for wear. He'd done all his missions and hadn't spoken to a single civilian. He'd even done his reports right. He really couldn't think of a reason why Gigi would want to speak to him. Naruto-kun, Gigi finally looked up. How have you been? Fine, he answered quickly, still suspicious. What do you want, Gigi? The Hokage leaned back in his chair and observed him. Naruto hated that. People just needed to come out and say the shit they wanted to say. It's why he liked Guy-sensei and even Sasuke, they didn't beat around the bush. Kakashi did it on purpose just to mess with him but not when it mattered. I just wanted to catch up with you, Naruto-kun, Gigi smiled. I have heard good things from my shinobi about your conduct on missions. I have also heard you have started to train your kenjutsu. Naruto still didn't get it. Gigi never called him just to catch up. It was always because he'd done something wrong or that he couldn't go to the Chunin exams or he needed to be nicer to the civilians. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen Gigi just for the sake of seeing Gigi. He also couldn't remember when he'd stopped trusting the old man. He never saw things from Naruto's point of view, never took his side. It was always Naruto's fault. Yeah, he said, purposefully not elaborating. The Hokage didn't answer him, just looking at him with a considering look. They were interrupted by the door to the office slamming open and a young child stomping forward to point a finger at the Hokage, holding a kunai in the air above his head. Today is the day I become the Hokage. He screamed at the top of his lungs. He was tiny, can't have been more than 5. In a yellow t-shirt with the leaf symbol on the front in red, gray shorts, and a weird cap that allowed a tuft of brown hair to emerge almost like a ponytail, he stuck out. He immediately tripped on the far too long blue scarf he had wrapped around his neck and Naruto didn't suppress his grin as the child landed heavily on the wooden floor with a thud. The kid looked up, a red mark on his forehead and tears starting to well in his dark eyes. His gaze locked onto Naruto and he sprang to his feet, directing his attention to him instead. You tripped me. Naruto looked back at him, unimpressed. Did I fuck? Naruto-kun, please watch your language, the Hokage admonished. This is my grandson, Konohamaru. Naruto rolled his eyes. This kid was going to grow up to be a shinobi, which meant he was in for a lot more than a few curse words. Hell, he'd already heard way worse at this kid's age. Hey, you tripped me, the kid stomped his foot in anger, crossing his arms in a huff. I want an apology. I didn't do anything, Naruto crossed his own arms, glaring down at the kid. You tripped over your scarf. You totally tripped me. Oh, Naruto was not getting blamed for this. Knowing his luck, he would actually get punished for this to make the kid feel better and would be expected to just suck it up for the Hokage's sake. Not today, he was not doing any D-ranks today. A look of realization crossed Konohamaru's face and Naruto braced for the new pile of shit this kid was spitting. You're trying to take my grandpa down before me, he accused. I won't let you steal the hat. I'm the one who's going to beat him and become the next Hokage. Naruto couldn't help it. He laughed, and once he started he couldn't stop. Every time he took in a breath to try and control himself the giggles burst out of him again. He clutched his stomach, getting a stitch. Gods, he couldn't breathe. That was the funniest shit he'd heard in a while. He straightened out from where he'd been hunched over, finally getting some control over himself. He wiped the wetness off his cheeks as he tried to resist bursting out laughing all over again at the sight of the kid's indignant expression. Kid, I cannot express to you how little I want to be the Hokage, he wheezed out. Gods, that is the funniest shit ever. Me, Hokage. Just the thought was enough to send him into another fit of giggles. Him, voluntarily choosing to not only stay in the village, but actually help and protect its citizens. Like, forget his entire upbringing, instead defend the very people he was trying to escape. It's not funny. It appeared the kid had never had this reaction before. Look, you are welcome to it, he waved a hand. The old man could use a good fight. He grinned over at the Hokage, who didn't seem to be as amused as Naruto thought he would be. They were interrupted again by a man sweeping dramatically into the office. Honorable grandson. Ebisu cried. Naruto's good mood soured immediately. He fucking hated Ebisu. He knew he was Guy's genin teammate and all, but the man hated him right back. He was so far up his own ass that his sunglasses had shit smeared on them. He never missed an opportunity to make Naruto feel like crap, and Naruto could tell the man shared the opinions of most of the civilians. He thought Naruto was lesser, that he shouldn't be a shinobi. He hadn't even done anything to the man to deserve this. He was glad Guy-sensei stood up for him, but there's nothing to be done. Assholes like Ebisu were just an unfortunate part of his life. Hokage-sama, I apologize most profusely for this interruption, the Jounin simpered. Come, honorable grandson. Let us leave Hokage-sama to his work. This guy tricked me. Konohamaru pointed to him, and Naruto could actually see the disgust behind Ebisu's glasses as he spotted him. It's not your fault, honorable grandson, Ebisu reassured the kid. You don't want to be associated with his kind. He's bad luck wherever he goes, the wrong example of a shinobi. You must avoid him in the future. Konohamaru gaped at him with this new information, but Naruto just looked away. The Hokage's silence was deafening. Come, honorable grandson. He has a fucking name, Naruto couldn't help but call out. You cannot use that sort of language around the honorable grandson, Ebisu snapped back. It may be befitting of someone of your station, but it is not for the rest of us. Naruto bit hard down on his lip to stop himself from retaliating. It wouldn't do anything, he would be the one to get in trouble. If they hadn't been in front of the Hokage, things would be different, but he had no faith the old man would choose him over his own flesh and blood, even if he was in the right. Can I go? Of course, Naruto-kun, the Sandaime nodded, features blank. We can catch up another time. Naruto left the office and started down the opposite corridor than the other pair. He knew things were going to wrong, but at least he now had official confirmation that the Hokage was no longer to be trusted. He wasn't Gigi anymore, if he ever was. Niji reluctantly followed his team towards the Hokage Tower to report for a D rank. It was unfortunate, but these asinine missions were a part of being a shinobi. Since his loss to the Uzumaki a few days ago, Niji had been deep in thought about his beliefs, the Uzumaki's words, his clan, his father. His father had been sacrificed in place of the clan head, and Niji had been convinced it was because his father was a branch member. It was their destiny to serve the main house, and this was only reinforced by the power of the cursed seal. He had seen too many occasions where a branch member was forced to submit under the pain of the activated seal. It was like having a chain around his neck, and the main house had the end of it, ready to suffocate him at any time. He could remember his father crippled in pain, his own brother standing over him, activating the cursed seal. He hated it. He hated other people having so much control over his life. He hated having to limit himself in case someone thought he was trying to rise above his station. They could all be proud of how strong he was, but he knew for a fact that they didn't believe he was a real threat. He was just something to be shown off to the village. Within the walls of the Hyuga compound, he was just like any other branch member. He knew he could be stronger than them all, but he was restricted. He wasn't allowed access to all the Hyuga clan's techniques. Weak little Hinata got that privilege. He knew she hadn't chosen the circumstances of her birth any more than he had, but it was still frustrating. She had everything he didn't, and she couldn't even find the courage to take it. He hated to admit it, but Uzumaki had a point. Niji had accepted the path in life the main house had laid out for him as much as he had resented it. He had accepted that there was nothing he could do in his position and hadn't fought it, blaming fate and his birth. He had never actually tried to go as far as he knew he could. He had channeled his frustration into tearing everyone else down like he had been, thinking that if he had to accept his fate that everyone else did too. He'd been holding himself back just as much as the main house were. The main house had put him in a cage, but he had never tried to escape. The Uzumaki seemed to come from the same place he did, with people trying to stop him becoming as strong as he could be. He had asked around after their fight and found that public opinion was very much against the younger genin. There was so much hostility, and although Niji didn't get why, he did have to acknowledge that Naruto knew what he was talking about. He had been torn down by others around him, but unlike Niji, who had accepted it as his fate, he had fought against it with everything he had. It was admirable, even if Niji still thought he was infuriating. He was a decent fighter too. The Uzumaki was the first person Niji had fought his own age who could actually beat him. He had known that Naruto was purposefully allowing him to recover so they could continue fighting, and it was shameful. He had not expected to be outmatched, but it did bode well for his assignment to Guy. He may not like the Uzumaki, but he had Niji's respect. Lee was talking about something in a volume unsuitable for public spaces, and Tenten was nodding along. He still thought Lee was fighting a losing battle, his limitations too great to overcome, but he now saw that he did not need to tear the other boy down further. It would be up to Lee to fight his own battles. He also still thought Hinata was pitifully weak for a member of the main house. He may be changing his mind on the finality of fate, but she had no excuse. Fate favored her and she still fell short. Naruto-kun. Niji looked up to see the menace in question. The boy was looking back at them, seeming to be unpleased by this development. He looked the same as he had last time Niji saw him, orange t-shirt, black sleeveless hoodie, absent Hitayate. His blue eyes were as stormy as before and his face was turned down into a scowl. The only time Niji could remember him smiling was when he was taunting them during their fight. Guy-sensei, he replied flatly, a stark contrast to their teacher. It was a strange juxtaposition. Guy was so happy and energetic while Naruto was grumpy and snappy. He did not know how they had managed to work effectively for the last couple of years with such different outlooks, but he supposed he would find out. Do you care to join us on our D rank? Guy grinned. Over my dead body. Guy was unfazed. Such passion, Naruto-kun. He boomed, clapping the boy firmly on the shoulder. Niji was now starting to see how this arrangement worked. Guy might be the only person that could deal with the sour genin. Naruto-senpai. Naruto did not even look in Lee's direction. I'm working on ninjutsu today, he said. Are we still on for after dinner? Of course, Naruto-kun. Guy threw him a thumbs up. We shall reach the springtime of our youth for all of Konoha to see. Naruto rolled his eyes, but Niji could see the fondness there. As Naruto looked at him, it abruptly vanished. Still on your fate bullshit? He asked directly. Niji looked at his teammates, unwilling to discuss it in front of them. He may not see them as hindrances anymore, but that didn't mean he trusted them yet. Naruto seemed to get the message. Hey, go get the mission, he told Guy. I'm borrowing the Hyuga for a sec. I'm so moved. Guy cried. Two of my wonderful students bonding, the most beautiful friendship is sure to bloom. Naruto made a face that Niji knew mirrored his own. Guy did leave them alone, entering the Hokage tower. Tenten stared curiously over her shoulder as Lee loudly proclaimed that he would win Naruto's friendship before Niji. Niji was happy to let him win that one. Naruto crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. You may have had a point, Niji admitted reluctantly. I may have been too focused on my destiny. You let yourself be held back by other people then got all mad about it, Naruto said frankly and Niji scowled. Yes, he ground out. You gonna continue with that? No, Niji answered firmly. I am in control of my destiny. I may have more limitations than others, but that will not stop me. Not anymore. Naruto surveyed him for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable. Niji did not like it, but he felt like he owed the other genin. He felt like they had an understanding. Naruto came from the same place he did, with others trying to keep them in their place. He knew the main house would not allow him to grow as strong as he wanted to, but he was ready to fight them now. His birth would not hold him back anymore. Not like it did his father. I am choosing to become strong enough that I will never lose again, he continued, staring into his eyes intently. Naruto broke out into the smallest grin. Good luck with that, he said. You'll be losing to me a lot. Niji glared at him, but it was missing the anger from before. I still do not like you, he felt like he had to add. The feeling is mutual. They stood, staring at each other for a long moment. Niji was unsure where they went from here, but he felt confident about the path he had chosen. He would show both the main house and the branch members what a caged bird could really do. Tenten adjusted the sack of flour on her shoulder, making sure it wouldn't slip out of her grasp. If she dropped it, she would then have to spend time cleaning it all up and fetching another, and she would much rather spend that time training. She'd been working on her own outside of their team training. She was a lot stronger than she had been when they'd fought Naruto a short time ago. She couldn't have lifted this sack of flour back in the academy. It was gratifying to see her hard work pay off, but she knew she was still a long way from where she was trying to go. She couldn't beat either of her teammates yet, although she got in way more hits than she used to. She'd convinced her father to increase the intensity of her weapons training too. It was slow, but she was getting there. She shoved a strand of hair that escaped one of her buns out of her face, just wanting this mission over with. She was pretty used to D ranks now, but that didn't make them any more interesting. Almost there, my wonderful students. Guy-sensei encouraged. The bakery will be able to make the best goods in Konoha with your youthful contribution. Tenten thought it was a little much for delivering sacks of flour, but she'd learned to let most of Guy-sensei's proclamations wash over her. It had taken a while, but she had learned to speak Guy. There was usually some sense buried under all that talk about youth, and he knew what he was doing in terms of training and missions. It had been a little weird to have every little thing celebrated, but she secretly liked all the positive reinforcement. She really felt like Guy-sensei did believe in them. Naruto-senpai. Tenten's head snapped up at Lee's voice, and she saw the genin in question heading in their direction. He looked as grumpy as ever, stomping through the street with his own luggage in tow. She wondered if he ever looked happy. They'd seen him a few times in the past week, always looking angry or miserable. They'd asked Guy-sensei, but the man had just said Naruto was assigned to D ranks for the week. Naruto spotted them and his expression didn't change. Another D rank? Niji asked. 2 days left, Naruto grumbled back, adjusting the box in his hands. I thought you didn't do D ranks anymore, Tenten chimed in, watching the blonde's expression darken. The Hokage seems to think it will teach me some manners, Naruto gritted out. I didn't even do anything this time. Tenten exchanged a look with her teammates. She had never heard of D ranks being used as a punishment, much less by the Hokage. It was really weird. Why would he do that? She asked. I caused some trouble when I first graduated, Naruto admitted. The Hokage thought I needed taught a lesson, and since I don't have a family or anything, he took it upon himself. I don't even do anything anymore, but he still forces me to do this crap when he thinks I've done something wrong. She glanced at Guy-sensei and was taken aback to see the man had stopped smiling, actually looking frustrated. Disapproving? Tenten couldn't tell. She had never the man without a happy smile before. She blinked and the look was gone as quickly as it came, replaced with Guy-sensei's normal bright expression. She looked at her teammates, but that hadn't appeared to notice. Was there something more to this? Guy-sensei hadn't looked happy that Naruto was on D ranks. Did he not agree with the Hokage? It's strange that D ranks would be used in that way, Niji frowned. Well, I've always been a special case, Naruto shrugged, but the way he said it made it sound like it was a bad thing. Why would Naruto be a special case? Was it because he graduated early? You are so youthful. Lee suddenly cried. Diligently performing these D ranks. You truly are our senpai. Naruto shot him a weird look. What's with the youth? He asked. That's Guy-sensei's thing. Guy-sensei has been showing us the wonderful ways of youth. Lee grinned in a way that was eerily similar to Guy-sensei. I have been adopting this philosophy myself, so I may become the most youthful shinobi in Konoha. Naruto must have seen it too as he grimaced, edging away from Lee slightly. Great, Naruto said flatly. I'm gonna get back to my mission then. He quickly walked past them and Tenten watched him go. Naruto always seemed to generate more questions than answers whenever they spoke. Why does the Hokage assign him D ranks? She asked Guy-sensei curiously. We are not in a position to question the Hokage, he replied cheerfully. I am sure Hokage-sama is trying to his best for Naruto-kun. Guy-sensei's grin didn't falter, but Tenten could sense there was something he wasn't telling them. She didn't think assigning Naruto missions he clearly hated was very helpful. It also made it seem like he was being singled out for something, but she couldn't imagine what it was. He was a little unfriendly and unapproachable, and used a few too many swears than Tenten knew her mother would be happy with, but he was a really good genin. He was strong and, from what she had seen of him so far, an incredibly hard worker. Naruto seemed like he could use more people on his side, and Tenten vowed she would try and be one of them. She might even be able to get some answers along the way. Naruto dragged his feet towards the training ground. He was finally free from the D ranks, only to get cornered by Guy-sensei into training with his team again. He had vowed not to get suckered in again, but he figured he owed his teacher from the last session he had with them. He had told Guy-sensei that he wouldn't fight them all again. He knew that was asking for trouble. The Hyuga had seemed to have adjusted his attitude from what he could tell from their conversation outside the Hokage tower. They weren't magically going to become friends or anything, but it made him a little more bearable. Naruto had accepted that he wouldn't be able to completely avoid interacting with Guy-sensei's new team, but that didn't mean he had to become best friends and skip into the sunset with them. He soon arrived at the training ground and spotted the 3 genin near the far edge. He'd been able to hear Lee on the walk up, and it reminded him a lot of Guy-sensei. Lee reminded him of Guy-sensei a bit too much these days. He was pretty sure the older genin was trying to become the man's twin. He was ranting about youth more and more these days, and Naruto dreaded the day he would see Lee sporting a green spandex one piece. It was fucking weird. He didn't know what was fucked in Lee's head so that he couldn't form his own independent identity, but the boy better realize that Guy-sensei wasn't his. Guy-sensei wasn't so shallow that imitation would sway him. Naruto-senpai. Naruto groaned as the idiot in question spotted him. I told you to stop calling me that, he said pointedly, shoving his hands in his pockets. I could not be so disrespectful. Naruto sighed, looking to the other 2 genin. Niji nodded a greeting and Tenten smiled nervously at him. Where's Guy-sensei? He had to go to the mission assignment desk, Tenten offered. Something about reports? He said we should train on our own until he gets here. Guy-sensei wishes for us to foster our own youth through independent, spirited training. Lee added. Those were closer to his exact words, Tenten admitted, shrugging. Great, he said flatly. He started to run through what he needed to work on. His kenjutsu was coming along nicely, but Hay-8 was still against him practicing on his own since he could mess up his form. His ninjutsu was okay, but not something he wanted to work on right now. His bloodline limit needed a lot of work, but that wasn't much use until he could train his body to keep up with it. He didn't really want a taijutsu battle with any of these guys. It wouldn't be very productive. He looked over at Tenten thoughtfully. You still training with weapons? She nodded, unable to hide her surprise at being addressed. Yeah, but I'm focusing more on kunai and shuriken right now, she said. My dad wants me to master the basics before moving on to other types. Perfect, Naruto replied. You can throw them at me. There was a moment of silence. What? She demanded. Target practice for you, dodging practice for me, he spelled out. Do you not already do that? That's a classic training exercise for a team with a weapon master in training. It was something he did need to work on, and it would improve his speed and reaction times, both essential to mastering his bloodline limit. Kakashi ambushed him occasionally, but a prolonged session of dodging would be pretty useful. He could even add it as a regular part of his training. Sasuke would be delighted to throw kunai at him. You are so knowledgeable, Lee cried. We have much we can learn from you. Niji remained quiet, as he had since Naruto had arrived in the clearing. He could see on his face, though, that he hadn't considered this idea before. His Byakugan would make dodging pretty easy for him, but it was still primarily chakra-based. Dodging plain metal kunai without his fancy clan techniques would be good for him. The Hyuga always over-relied on their bloodline anyway. Well, he asked, a bit impatient. What if I hit you? She replied, a bit hesitant. Then you should be happy with your aim, he said slowly, a bit confused. That would be on me for not dodging fast enough. A minor stabbing wouldn't even faze him. The Kyuubi took care of stuff like that within minutes. Plus, it wasn't like he was going to hold a grudge or anything. He knew he wasn't the most tolerant person ever, but he was the one asking. It didn't make sense that she would be worried about him retaliating or getting mad. But I could really hurt you, she insisted, her brown eyes boring into him with an emotion that he was unfamiliar with. Why do you care about that? He crossed his arms. That's not even relevant, I'll be fine. Just don't aim for my head. She looked at him, at a loss, and Naruto noticed that even Lee had gone quiet. He felt like he was missing something. He hated that feeling. It's just a training exercise, he snapped, his confusion morphing into anger. What is the big deal? I don't want to hurt you. Tenten yelled, and Naruto was alarmed to see she was getting upset. I can't just throw weapons at you. I couldn't live with myself if I actually hit you. What part of that don't you get? Naruto blinked. She was worried about hitting him because she didn't want to hurt him. What the fuck? How weak did she think he was? You could have just said no, he snapped, glaring at her. I should have known better than to train with some fucking green genin anyway. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. I'm not so weak that a training exercise is going to kill me, and the fact you think that you are good enough to hurt me, despite all evidence pointing to the exact fucking opposite, is a fucking joke. He knew he was being harsh, but he was so fucking annoyed. The suggestion that he wouldn't be able to cope with such a simple exercise was insulting. He hadn't put blood, sweat, and every ounce of his being into training for the past few years to be talked down to by a genin that only graduated a few weeks ago. There was always a risk of injury during training. It wouldn't be effective otherwise. He'd come home with more bruises and aches than he could count from training with Gai-sensei, and Kakashi wasn't soft on him either. He knew they would never really hurt him, but they also didn't baby him either. They trusted him to know his own limits. Even Sasuke knew better. He knew when he suggested this training exercise to the Uchiha, he wouldn't hesitate to agree because he would be able to see the value in it. Naruto could even admit that they could alter the kunai so they didn't injure as much, but Tenten hadn't considered that. Fuck this, he said beneath his breath, turning to leave. Let me know when you grow a spine. He stomped out, stopping at the tree line and taking a peek behind him. When he saw Tenten rubbing tears out of her eyes, Lee trying to comfort her, it twisted his gut. He hated this feeling. He only ever got it when he felt like he'd disappointed Gai-sensei. He didn't even know why things had turned out like this. He hadn't tried to upset them or even rile them up. He just suggested a simple training exercise. He was even willing to train with them. He didn't know what he did wrong. Maybe he just wasn't supposed to work with people his age. The academy had made that exceedingly clear to him, and other than Sasuke, it had only been reinforced by his interactions with Guy's team. He wasn't made to be on a team, but that was good. They wouldn't hold him back. He would stick to his initial plan of avoiding them. He couldn't do anything wrong if he didn't engage at all. It was working with the civilians. Niji met his eyes and raised an eyebrow at him. Naruto petulantly raised his middle finger at the Hyuga before continuing to stomp away. He needed to find Sasuke. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share. Want early audio-only versions? Join me on Patreon, link in description. I'm Fox Sage. See you next time.